He ripped the dress out of her hands and smirked. You really thought you could afford this? The words hit before she could react, sharp, public, deliberate, and suddenly the entire boutique felt smaller, tighter, like the air itself had turned against her. Emily Carter did not move, not when the sales associate looked away, not when a couple near the mirror whispered just loud enough to be heard, not even when the man standing in front of her let out a quiet, amused laugh like this was entertainment. Jason Blackwood did not raise his voice. He did not need to, because everything about him already demanded attention, from the tailored suit to the watch that probably cost more than most people's rent. This section is private, he added, almost casually, as if correcting a mistake that should have never happened. And just like that, she was no longer a customer. She was a problem. Someone shifted behind her. A phone lifted slightly, recording, or maybe just pretending to. The moment stretched. It always did when humiliation was involved. Emily glanced down at the dress for half a second. Soft fabric, clean lines, nothing flashy, just expensive enough to belong here, just out of place enough in her hands to make him confident in his judgment. I said, put it back, Jason continued, stepping closer now, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel personal, controlled, like he was being generous. Or do I need to call security? That word landed differently. Security. Not help, not service, just removal. The sales associate finally spoke, but not to defend her. Ma'am, maybe you should look at something in the front section. The front section. Cheaper, safer, invisible. Emily inhaled slowly, steadying something inside her that had already begun to shift, though no one else could see it yet. She could feel every eye on her, waiting, expecting the same outcome they had seen 100 times before. Embarrassment, retreat, silence. And for a brief second, it almost happened. Her fingers loosened slightly, the dress slipping just enough to suggest surrender, just enough to confirm everything he believed about her. Jason noticed it too, the corner of his mouth lifting, victory already settling in. But then, as she stopped, not dramatically, not loudly, just enough. Her grip tightened again, subtle, but different. And that was the first crack in the moment. No, she said, barely above a whisper, but it carried further than it should have. Jason frowned, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that did not match the situation he thought he controlled. Excuse me, he replied, tilting his head slightly, studying her now instead of dismissing her. Emily did not answer right away. She stepped forward instead, slow, deliberate, placing the dress neatly on the counter as if none of this had happened, as if she belonged there all along. The room shifted again, quieter this time, more curious than judgmental. I am buying it, she said, her voice steady now, clearer, leaving no space for interpretation. A beat of silence followed, heavier than before. And then Jason laughed. Louder this time. More open. You, he said, glancing around as if inviting others to share in the joke. That dress is $8,000. He let the number hang in the air, like a final blow, like something that would end this conversation for good. But Emily did not react the way he expected. She did not flinch. She did not argue. She simply reached into her bag, slow enough to make everyone watch, precise enough to make it feel intentional. And when her hand came back up, holding something small, something ordinary, the tension in the room did not drop, it sharpened. Because something about that movement, that pause, that quiet confidence did not match the story he thought he was telling. And for the first time, Jason Blackwood hesitated, just for a second, just enough to feel it, something was about to shift. The card did not look impressive at first glance. No gold edges, no flashy design, just matte black, quiet, almost understated, but the way she placed it on the counter made the air shift again, subtle, but undeniable. The sales associate hesitated, fingers hovering just above it, as if unsure whether to take it or question it, and that hesitation alone was enough to ripple through the room. Jason noticed it too, his expression tightening just slightly, not fear, not yet, but something closer to irritation, like the script he had already decided on was beginning to slip. Go ahead, he said, gesturing toward the card with a small, dismissive wave, as if encouraging the inevitable failure he expected. Let us. I'll see how this ends. A few people chuckled quietly, not cruel, just comfortable following his lead, And that was the part that stung more than anything, how easily the room had chosen a side. Emily felt it, that quiet agreement forming around her, the assumption that she did not belong here, that she had made a mistake just by stepping inside. And for a moment, a very brief moment, doubt flickered again. Not about the card, not about the purchase, but about something deeper, something harder to name. The way the associate avoided her eyes, the way security had not stepped back even after she spoke, the way Jason seemed too confident, too prepared for this moment, as if he had seen it before, as if he had done this before. "Ma'am," the associate finally said, her voice careful now, almost cautious, as she picked up the card. "Are you sure you want to proceed?" The question sounded polite, but underneath it was something else, something closer to disbelief. Emily nodded once. No hesitation this time. The machine beeped as the card was inserted, a simple sound, ordinary, but in that silence, it felt louder than it should have. Everyone watched, even the people who pretended not to. The screen flickered, then paused, just for a second too long. The associate frowned slightly, tapping the screen again, then glancing up at Emily, then at Jason, then back at the screen. "Is there a problem?" Jason asked, his tone sharper now, less amused, more impatient. "Sometimes these machines take a second," the associate replied quickly, but her voice had changed, the confidence gone, replaced by something uncertain. Emily noticed it immediately. That shift, small but real. And suddenly, the weight pressing down on her chest began to loosen, just slightly. Not relief, not yet, but awareness. Something was off. The system was not reacting the way it normally would. She had been in enough places like this, seen enough transactions, to know how quickly things usually moved when nothing was wrong. This was not that. The machine beeped again. Different this time. The associate's eyes widened just a fraction, almost unnoticeable unless someone was looking directly at her, the way Emily was now. "What is it?" Jason pressed, stepping closer to the counter, his presence tightening the space again, trying to reclaim control. The associate did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned slightly, signaling toward the back, a silent request. And that was when it clicked. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Emily felt it in her chest, that quiet, creeping realization that this moment, this entire situation, might not be as random as it seemed. The way Jason had approached her so quickly, the way security had been ready, the way the staff had sided with him without question. It was too smooth, too practiced, like a routine. The manager appeared moments later, walking briskly, already wearing a polite smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, but his gaze was already on the screen, already processing something the others could not yet see. The associate leaned in, whispering just enough for him to hear. His expression changed instantly. Not dramatically, not enough for the room to fully understand, but enough. His posture straightened, his tone shifting, his attention redirecting. And for the first time since she walked in, Emily was no longer invisible. He looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time, and then back at the screen. Jason frowned. "Is there a problem with the card?" he asked, slower now, more cautious. The manager did not answer him. Instead, he reached for the receipt printer, pressing a button with deliberate care, as if confirming something before anyone else could question it. The machine whirred softly. Paper began to slide out. And as the first line of numbers appeared, the manager's eyes flickered again, this time with something unmistakable. Recognition. Emily felt it, that shift in the room growing stronger, the balance tilting, just slightly, but enough to be noticed. Jason leaned in closer, trying to see, trying to understand, but the manager's hand moved just enough to block his view, not aggressively, just intentionally. And that was when Emily realized this was not just about a dress, and whatever was printed on that receipt was about to change everything. The receipt kept printing, inch by inch, longer than it should have been, and the longer it went, the quieter the room became, as if something invisible had just taken control of the space. Emily watched it closely, not the numbers, not yet, but the reactions around it, the way the manager's posture had shifted, the way the associate stepped back instead of forward, and the way no one was laughing anymore. Something had changed, and she felt it before she fully understood it. But instead of staying quiet, instead of letting the moment unfold, she made a choice. A small one. Fast. Not planned. Go ahead, she said, her voice sharper now, cutting through the silence. Read it out loud. The words landed harder than she expected, and for a second, even she felt it, that ripple of tension snapping tighter. The manager hesitated. Not long, just enough to make it noticeable. Ma'am, that is not necessary, he replied carefully, his tone now respectful, almost cautious. But that only made it worse, because now it was obvious. Something was being hidden. Something was not meant for everyone to hear. And suddenly, the humiliation she had just endured twisted into something else. Suspicion. No, Emily said again, louder this time, turning slightly so the people behind her could hear. I think it is. A murmur spread through the crowd, subtle but alive, and for the first time, the attention was no longer just on her as a target, but on the situation itself. Jason's expression darkened, not with anger, but with calculation, as if he was trying to regain control of something that was slipping faster than he liked. You are making a scene, he said quietly, stepping closer, lowering his voice again. But this time it did not feel like power, it felt like pressure. This is not how things work here. That sentence lingered. Not how things work here. Emily caught it immediately. The wording, the certainty, as if there were rules she did not know, as if there was a system already in place. And for a split second, she wondered, how many times had this exact moment happened before? But she had already pushed too far to stop now. The manager finally tore the receipt from the printer, folding it once, then holding it close to his chest instead of placing it on the counter. That alone said everything. I will handle this personally, he said, directing his words at Emily now. Not Jason, not the room, just her. If you would come with me. No, she cut in again, faster this time, more instinct than strategy. We can do it right here. Another silence. He did not like that. She could see it. Not anger, not frustration, something colder, controlled, measured. The kind of reaction that did not come from a simple retail problem. The kind that came from something bigger. The associate shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the entrance, where security still stood, but now they were not looking at Emily. They were watching the manager. Waiting. For instructions. That was when the realization hit her harder. This was not just a store. This was not just about money. There was structure here. Authority. A quiet chain of control that moved without being announced. And she had just stepped directly into it. Jason exhaled slowly, then smiled again, but it was different now. Thinner, more restrained. You should listen to him, he said, nodding toward the manager. It would be easier. Easier. The word echoed in her head. Easier for who? Emily felt the pressure building again, not from the crowd this time, but from something less visible, something that did not need to raise its voice to be felt. And for the first time, doubt shifted into something sharper. Not fear. Awareness. She had pushed back. She had challenged the moment. But she had also drawn attention. The wrong kind. The manager stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Miss Carter, he said quietly, and that was the moment everything inside her tightened. He knew her name. She had not given it. Not here. Not to anyone. Her breath caught, just for a second, and in that second, she understood something she had not seen before. This was not random. This was not just judgment. This was something else entirely. Something already in motion before she even walked through the door. And now, she had just made herself visible inside it. The room did not get louder. It got quieter, the kind of silence that did not belong in a store, the kind that meant someone else was now paying attention. Emily felt it before she saw anything change, a shift that did not come from the people around her, but from something behind them, something deeper in the structure she had just stepped into. The manager straightened slightly, not nervous, not afraid, just aligned, as if he was no longer making decisions on his own. Miss Carter, he repeated, softer this time, almost respectful, but there was weight behind it now, something that made her chest tighten again. She did not answer right. Away. Her mind was racing, trying to connect pieces that did not seem to fit, how he knew her name, why the receipt was being hidden, why the atmosphere had changed so suddenly without anyone explaining anything. And then she noticed something else. The security near the entrance shifted, not toward her, but slightly to the side, creating a clear path through the store without saying a word. No announcement. No explanation. Just space. And everyone seemed to understand what that meant except her. Emily followed their line of sight, slowly, carefully, and that was when she saw him. He had been there the whole time. Or maybe he had just arrived. It was impossible to tell. He stood near the back of the boutique, just outside the main display area, not dressed louder than anyone else, not trying to stand out. But somehow the entire room had already adjusted around him. People were not looking at him directly, but they were aware, every movement quieter, every conversation gone. He did not step forward. He did not need to. His presence alone was enough. Emily felt it immediately, that invisible line she had crossed without knowing it, the one that separated ordinary conflict from something else entirely. The manager glanced toward him for less than a second, just a flick of the eyes, but it was enough. Permission, confirmation, something unspoken had just been decided. We should continue this privately, the manager said again, firmer now, but still controlled, as if giving her one last option that was not really an option at all. Emily swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. She wanted to ask questions, wanted to demand answers, but the words did not come out the way she expected. "Why do you know my name?" she asked instead, quieter now, the defiance still there, but thinner, less certain. The manager paused, not because he did not have an answer, but because he was deciding how much she was allowed to know. "We are very careful about our clients," he replied, choosing his words slowly, deliberately. Clients. The word felt wrong. She had not bought anything yet. She had not even finished the transaction. And yet they were already placing her into a category she did not understand. Behind her, someone shifted, then another, the crowd beginning to thin out without being told to leave, as if they knew this. Moment was no longer for them. Jason stepped back as well, not retreating, just repositioning, his confidence no longer loud, but still present, like he trusted whatever was happening now to resolve in his favor. Emily felt it again, that imbalance, growing wider, heavier, pressing down from all sides. She had thought this was about proving a point, about correcting a moment of humiliation, but now it felt like she had opened something she could not close. Her hand instinctively moved toward the counter, toward the receipt, but the manager's fingers tightened slightly around it, not aggressively, just enough to stop her. "Not here," he said, softer now but final. And for the first time since this started, she hesitated without recovering. Not because she wanted to back down, but because she realized something she had not seen before. This was not a situation she could control. Not with a card. Not with a purchase. Not even with the truth. Whatever system she had stepped into, it was already ahead of her, already prepared, already deciding how this would end. And as she stood there, surrounded by people who no longer looked at her the same way, she felt it clearly, unmistakably. She was no longer the one setting the terms of this moment. Emily did not move, not right away, but something inside her had already begun to shift, slow at first, like a quiet crack beneath the surface, and then sharper, clearer, impossible to ignore. The pressure around her was still there, the silence, the watching eyes, the controlled tone of the manager, the presence in the back of the room that no one dared to acknowledge out loud. But for the first time since she walked in, she was not focused on them. She was focused on herself, on what had just happened, on how quickly she had been reduced, dismissed, handled, as if she was something that needed to be corrected instead of understood. Her fingers curled slightly against the counter, not in fear, not anymore, but in restraint, because she understood something now that she had not seen before. This was not just a misunderstanding. This was not just one arrogant man and a rude employee. This was a system, a pattern, a place where people like her were expected to stay quiet, to accept, to leave without asking questions. And the moment she stepped outside of that expectation, everything changed. The manager was still watching her, waiting, calm, patient, as if he already knew how this would end. As if everyone did. "Miss Carter," he said again, a little firmer now, but still polite, still controlled. "We can resolve this quickly if you cooperate." Cooperate. The word landed differently this time. Not as an offer, as a condition. Emily let out a slow breath, her chest rising, then falling, her eyes lowering for just a second before lifting again, steady, focused, no longer searching for approval. "You humiliated me," she said quietly, not to the room, not to Jason, not even to the manager, but to the moment itself, as if naming it made it real in a way they could not ignore. The manager did not respond. He did not deny it either. That silence said enough. Behind her, The last few people shifted, some stepping back entirely now, creating more space, more distance, like they did not want to be part of whatever this had become. Emily noticed it, the way support never came, the way no one had spoken up for her, the way the entire room had chosen comfort over fairness without even thinking about it. And that hurt more than the words, more than the mocking, because it was quiet, invisible, easy. She swallowed again, her throat still tight, but her voice when it came back was different, stronger. "I am not leaving," she said, each word deliberate, each one placed exactly where it needed to be. A pause followed, a real one this time, not controlled, not expected. The manager's expression did not change much, but there was a flicker there, something small, something that suggested this was not the response he had planned for. Jason shifted his weight slightly, watching her now with a different kind of attention, less amused, more curious, as if trying to understand where this version of her had come from. Emily felt the imbalance still, the weight of it, the fact that she had no real leverage, no authority, no understanding of the system she was pushing against, but that did not matter in this moment, because something more important had changed. She was no longer asking for permission to exist in that space. The manager took a step closer, lowering his voice again, quieter, more precise. "You are making this more complicated than it needs to be." There it was again. Control. Framing. A gentle way of telling her that resistance was the problem, not what had been done to her. Emily shook her head slowly, not aggressively, not emotionally, just clearly. "No," she said. "You already made it complicated." That landed. Not loudly, but enough. Enough for the air to tighten again. Enough for the balance to shift just slightly. Enough for the moment to stop following the script they had set for it. She glanced once, briefly, toward the back of the store, toward the man who had not moved, who had not spoken, but whose presence still shaped everything around them, and for a second, doubt tried to return. The scale of what she was facing. The gap between her and whatever this system was. It was real. It was undeniable. But this time it did not stop her. Her hand moved again, this time not toward the receipt, but toward the counter itself, grounding herself, steadying her voice before she spoke again. "You said I am a client," she continued, her tone even, controlled. "Then treat me like one." The manager held her gaze, measuring, calculating, deciding. And for the first time, the outcome was not completely predictable. The silence stretched, heavier now, more dangerous, but also more open. Emily felt it, that edge, that line she was standing on, the point where she could still step back, still walk away, still let this end quietly, where she could step forward, into something she did not fully understand, into a system that clearly did not expect to be challenged. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from clarity. She knew what this was now, and more importantly, she knew what she was not willing to accept anymore. "I am not going anywhere," she said, steady, final, her eyes locked forward. "Not until you show me exactly what you try to hide." Emily did not speak again right away, and that silence was no longer hesitation, it was calculation. She stayed exactly where she was, her hand resting lightly on the counter, her posture steady, but her eyes began to move, not randomly, not nervously, but with purpose. She watched the manager first, the way his shoulders stayed squared even under pressure, the way he never raised his voice, never lost control, as if control itself was the rule here. Then she shifted her attention to the associate, who now avoided looking at her completely, waiting instead for instructions, not thinking, just following. And then, security, still near the entrance, but no longer focused on her, their attention subtly redirected, waiting for a signal that had not been given yet. It was a system, not loud, not obvious, but precise. Everyone had a role. Everyone knew when to move and when to stay still. And for the first time, Emily stopped seeing herself as the center of the conflict and started seeing the structure around it. That changed everything. Because if this was a system, then it had patterns, and patterns could be tested. Her gaze flicked once more toward the back of the room, toward the man who had not moved, who had not spoken, but whose presence shaped every decision being made. He was still watching, not directly, but enough. Enough to confirm what she already suspected. Authority here did not need to be loud. It just needed to be recognized. Emily inhaled slowly, then let it out, her heartbeat still fast, but her thoughts, clearer now. She could not overpower this. Not yet. But maybe she could shift it. Just slightly. Just enough to see how far she could go. You called me a client, she said again. But this time her tone was different, softer, almost neutral, as if she was no longer arguing, just clarifying. The manager's eyes stayed on her, attentive, but cautious. Yes, he replied. Then there is a standard, she continued, her voice even, measured, each word placed carefully. You protect your client's privacy. A small pause. Not long, but enough. The manager did not respond immediately, and that was the first signal. She had touched something real, something inside the rules. Emily continued before he could redirect. You would not want personal information exposed in a public space, she added, glancing briefly, intentionally, at the people still lingering nearby, at the phone still half raised, at the quiet attention that had not fully disappeared. The implications settled into the room slowly, but clearly. This was not just about her anymore. This was about them. About how they handled situations like this. About what kind of place this really was. The associate shifted again, more noticeably this time. One of the security guards glanced toward the manager, just for a second, waiting. Even Jason's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough to show that the direction of the moment was no longer as predictable as before. Emily felt it, that small shift, that subtle change in balance. It was not power, not yet, but it was movement, and movement meant possibility. The manager exhaled slowly, then adjusted his grip on the receipt, not tighter, not looser, just reconsidering. We take discretion very seriously, he said finally, his tone still calm, but now slightly more formal, as if he was speaking not just to her, but to the situation she had just reframed. Exactly, Emily replied, almost immediately, not giving him time to redirect again. So whatever is on that receipt should be handled properly. Another pause, this one longer. He understood what she was doing now. She was not demanding. She was aligning herself with the rules, using them, testing them, and for the first time, he could not dismiss her as simply emotional or out of place. She had stepped into the structure, carefully, intentionally, and that made her harder to remove. The room held its breath again, but this time the tension felt different, less one-sided, more uncertain. Emily did not move, did not push further. She had already done enough. Now she watched, waited, learned. The manager finally nodded once, a small motion, but decisive. Very well, he said, his voice controlled, but now carrying a different kind of weight. He turned slightly, positioning himself between her and the rest of the room, creating a subtle barrier, a shift that would have gone unnoticed if she had not been paying attention. But she was. She saw everything now. The receipt was lowered. Not fully revealed. Not yet. But no longer hidden either. And in that small, precise adjustment, Emily saw it clearly. Her move had worked. The receipt lowered just enough for her to see a fragment of numbers. Not the full total, not the full truth, but enough to confirm what she already felt in her chest. This was not a mistake, and whatever was written there mattered far more than anyone wanted to admit. Emily did not reach for it this time. That was the difference. She held her position, her hand still resting lightly against the counter, her posture calm, her breathing steady, but her awareness had sharpened, every detail around her now part of something she was actively reading. The manager had shifted. The associate had gone silent. Even Jason, who once filled the space with easy confidence, was now watching more carefully than before. But it was the man in the back that changed everything. She did not look at him directly, not at first, but she felt it, that shift in attention, subtle but unmistakable, like a light turning toward her without moving. It was not interest. It was not curiosity in the way people usually looked. It was evaluation, controlled, measured, as if she had just stepped into a category he had not expected to see here. Emily let her eyes move slowly, deliberately, not rushing, not reacting, just observing the reflection of him in the polished glass display beside her. He had not moved, not even slightly, but something about the stillness itself was intentional, as if movement would have been unnecessary. And that was when she understood something new. In this system, power did not need to act to be felt. It only needed to exist. The realization did not scare her the way it should have. It grounded her, because now she knew what she was up against. And more importantly, she knew what not to do. She did not speak to him. She did not acknowledge him. Instead, she turned her attention back to the manager, maintaining the structure she had just entered, keeping the conversation within the rules she had already tested. "So," she said, her tone even, controlled, as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. "We are continuing this here." It was not a question. The manager held her gaze for a second longer this time, as if reassessing her position in whatever framework he was operating under. Then he nodded once, slight, precise. "Yes," he replied. Behind him, the associate straightened just a little, waiting for the next instruction, but the manager did not give one right away. That hesitation, small as it was, told Emily something important. The decision was no longer automatic. It was being considered. That meant she had disrupted something. Just enough. She let the silence sit for a moment, not rushing to fill it, not forcing the next move. And in that pause, she felt it again, that attention from the back of the room sharpening, focusing, narrowing in on her not as a problem, but as something else. Something unexpected. Emily's pulse picked up, but her expression did not change. She had learned that much already. Reaction gave away position. And position, in a place like this, meant everything. Jason shifted again, this time stepping slightly to the side, clearing his own line of sight toward her, as if even he wanted to understand what was happening now. But she did not look at him. He was no longer the center of this moment. He had never been. The manager finally moved, turning the receipt slightly, angling it so that only she could see a little more of it, still not fully revealing it, but enough to test her reaction. Emily leaned forward just slightly, not eager, not desperate, just enough to close the distance by an inch or two. Her eyes scanned the visible lines quickly, efficiently, taking in what she could without asking for more. Numbers, codes, a name, not hers, not his, something else entirely. And that was when the second shift happened. Not in the room. Inside her. This was bigger than she thought. Bigger than a purchase. Bigger than a moment of humiliation. There was a network here. A structure behind the surface. And somehow, she had just brushed against it. She straightened again, her expression unchanged, her voice steady when she spoke. "That is not standard," she said quietly, almost as if she was stating an observation rather than making a challenge. The manager's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus. He understood now. She was not reacting anymore. She was analyzing. And that made her different. Behind him, the silence deepened again, but this time it carried something new. Not dismissal, not control, but attention, the kind that did not go away easily. Emily felt it fully now, that invisible line she had crossed, the one that separated someone who could be ignored from someone who needed to be watched. And as she stood there, calm, composed, refusing to step back or rush forward, she knew that whatever this system was, it had just started asking questions about her. Emily did not look away from the receipt, even when the manager subtly tried to angle it back out of view, because in that brief glimpse, something had already settled deep inside her, something heavier than embarrassment, heavier than doubt. It was recognition, not of the numbers themselves, not of the account codes or the structured formatting, but of the pattern, the way it was organized, the way it was categorized. This was not a simple purchase record. This was a system record. She leaned back slowly, her eyes lifting from the paper to the manager's face, searching, not for answers, but for confirmation. And she found it in the smallest detail, the way he avoided correcting her earlier statement, the way he chose his words carefully, the way he never once denied that something was being controlled behind the scenes. The realization did not come all at once. It unfolded, quietly, piece by piece. And with it came something sharper than fear. Anger. Not loud, not explosive, but deep, controlled, the kind that did not fade easily. This was never about a dress, she said, almost to herself, but the words carried just enough for the manager to hear. He did not respond. He did not need to. His silence confirmed more than any explanation could. Emily's fingers curled slightly again, this time not from restraint, but from clarity. She replayed the moment in her mind, the way Jason had approached her immediately, the way the associate had sided against her without hesitation, the way security had been ready before anything even escalated. It was too smooth, too fast, too practiced. This had happened before, maybe not with her, but with someone, many times. And suddenly, the humiliation felt different. It was not random. It was structured. A test. A filter. A way to determine who belonged and who did not. And she had walked straight into it. Not by accident, but by design. Her chest tightened, not from weakness, but from the weight of understanding something she had not been meant to see. She had been evaluated the moment she walked in, judged before she spoke, handled before she acted, reduced to a role she never agreed to play. A pawn. The word formed quietly in her mind, settling into place with uncomfortable precision. Not important enough to control the game, but useful enough to move. And that realization burned. Emily lifted her gaze again, this time not just at the manager, but past him, toward the back of the room, toward the man who had not spoken once, yet had shaped everything. She did not need to look directly at him to feel it. That attention, that quiet observation that had never left her. It was clearer now. She was not just being watched. She was being assessed. And the worst part was that she had already reacted exactly the way they expected. At first, the humiliation, the hesitation, the almost retreat. It fit their pattern perfectly. But then something changed. And that was the part they had not planned for. Emily felt it in her chest again. That shift, that turning point where pain stopped being passive and became something else. Something sharper. Something that demanded a response. Not emotional, not impulsive, but intentional. How many times, she asked suddenly, her voice calm, but carrying a weight that made the question heavier than it sounded. The manager blinked once, just once, and that was enough. Enough to tell her she had hit something real. I am not sure what you mean, he replied, but his tone was different now, more guarded, less open than before. Emily nodded slowly, as if she expected that answer. How many times have you done this? She clarified, her eyes steady, her voice controlled, but the emotion underneath it undeniable now. Not loud, but present. The associate shifted again, more visibly this time. One of the security guards looked away. Even Jason, who had once stood so confidently, now seemed quieter. Not defeated, but uncertain. The balance had changed again. Slightly, but enough. The manager did not answer immediately. And in that silence, Emily understood something else. This was not just a single location. Not just one store. This was a system that extended beyond this room. Structured, repeated, refined, and whatever she had just uncovered was only a fraction of it. Her anger settled deeper, no longer sharp, but steady, like a current running beneath everything she said and did. You decide who belongs, she continued, her tone softer now, but more dangerous because of it. Before they even speak, the manager held her gaze, and for the first time, there was no immediate response. No redirection, just silence. And that silence said everything. Emily exhaled slowly, her mind no longer racing, but aligning, connecting pieces she had not even known existed before today. This was bigger than her, bigger than this moment, bigger than a single confrontation. And yet she was in it now, fully, whether she wanted to be or not. Behind the manager, the receipt still rested partially visible. The numbers no longer just numbers, but evidence of something deeper, something structured, something hidden just beneath the surface. Emily glanced at it one more time, then lifted her eyes again, steady, focused, no longer uncertain. And in that moment, she realized something that made her pulse slow instead of spike. If this was only the surface, then whatever was underneath it was far more dangerous than anything she had faced so far. Emily did not rush the moment, and that restraint became her advantage. The silence stretched again, but this time it did not belong entirely to them. It held her in it too. She could feel the shift, fragile but real, like a door that had opened just an inch, not enough to walk through, but enough to see what was on the other side. Her eyes moved once more to the receipt, not greedily, not obviously, just enough to catch another fragment as the manager adjusted his grip without realizing it. A name, not hers, not Jason's, but familiar in a way she could not place immediately, like something she had seen before but never paid attention to. That was the first layer. The second came from the formatting itself, the way certain lines were coded, marked, separated from what should have been a simple transaction. It was not just a purchase. It was logged, tagged, categorized, and that meant it could be traced. Emily felt it instantly, that small but powerful realization settling into her thoughts. Information was not just controlled here. It was stored, and anything that was stored could be used. She did not react outwardly. That was the key. She kept her expression neutral, her breathing even, her posture unchanged, but inside, something aligned. If they were protecting the receipt, then the receipt mattered. If the receipt mattered, then the information on it had value. And if it had value, then it could be leveraged. Her fingers shifted slightly on the counter, just enough to draw attention without making it obvious. "You said this would be handled properly," she said, her tone calm, almost cooperative now, as if she had accepted the rules instead of challenging them. The manager watched her closely, measuring again, trying to determine whether this was submission or something else. "It will," he replied, but there was a pause before the words, a hesitation. That had not been there earlier. Emily caught it. That was her opening. Small, narrow, but real. "Then I assume there is nothing on that receipt that violates your own standards," she continued, her voice steady, her words carefully chosen, not an accusation, not a demand, but a statement that forced him into a position. Either agree or explain. An explanation was something this system clearly avoided. The manager's jaw tightened slightly, almost unnoticeable, but enough. Behind him, the associate shifted again, glancing between them, uncertain. Even the security near the entrance adjusted their stance, not moving forward, not stepping back, just alert. The tension returned, but it was different now. Not one-sided, not controlled entirely by them. Emily felt it, that delicate balance tipping just slightly in her direction. She was not winning, not even close, but she was no longer losing in the same way. Jason exhaled quietly, then spoke, his tone lighter than before, but edged with something sharper underneath. "You are pushing too hard," he said, almost casually, as if giving advice instead of issuing a warning. Emily did not look at him. That was intentional. She kept her focus on the manager, on the structure, on the rules she had begun to understand. Because Jason was no longer the threat. The system was. And she needed to stay inside it, not react outside of it. "I am asking for consistency," she replied, her voice calm, controlled, refusing to match his tone. Another pause. The manager glanced down at the receipt again, then back at her, and in that brief exchange, something shifted again. Decision. Not final, but forming. He turned the receipt slightly more, just enough for her to see a full line this time. A transaction reference. A location code. And then a designation. Not a product. Not a price. A category. Emily's eyes locked onto it for half a second, no longer, committing it to memory before her expression could change. That was her move. Not visible. Not dramatic. But critical. Because now she had something they did not know she had. Something small, but enough to matter. She straightened slightly, her voice quiet when she spoke again. "Thank you," she said, as if the moment had been resolved, as if she had accepted the outcome. The manager studied her carefully, trying to read what had just happened, trying to determine whether she had gained anything at all. He could not tell. That uncertainty was her advantage. But it was also dangerous. Because systems like this did not tolerate uncertainty for long. Behind him, the man in the back of the room shifted for the first time, not a full step, not a movement anyone else would notice, but enough to change the energy in the space. Emily felt it instantly. That attention had sharpened again, focused, directed, and this time, it was no longer just observing. It was assessing her as a variable that had just changed the equation. The shift happened so quietly that at first, Emily almost missed it, but her instincts did not anymore. The manager's posture changed again, not in hesitation this time, but in resolution, as if a decision had just been made somewhere beyond him, somewhere higher in the structure she had only begun to understand. "We will complete this transaction now," he said, his tone smooth, controlled, but final, and before she could respond, the associate moved, faster than before, reaching for the card reader with a precision that felt rehearsed. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly. This was not compliance. This was containment. The receipt was turned away from her again, fully this time, no longer angled, no longer offering even the smallest glimpse. That door closed. Her chest tightened. She had just lost visibility. The one advantage she had gained, fragile as it was, slipped out of reach in a single, controlled motion. "Wait," she said, stepping forward just half an inch, but it was enough to break the rhythm they were trying to reestablish. The manager did not look at her immediately. That was new. That delay was deliberate. There is no need to delay further, he replied, his voice calm, but now carrying something colder underneath, something that no longer invited cooperation. It expected it. Emily felt it then, the pushback, not loud, not aggressive, but precise, targeted. The system had adjusted, and it was correcting her position. Jason exhaled softly to her side, a quiet sound, but filled with a kind of satisfaction that made her stomach twist. Not because he understood everything, but because he could feel the shift too. Told you, he murmured, just low enough for her to hear. You should have left when you had the chance. Emily ignored him, but the words landed anyway, echoing in the back of her mind, not as truth, but as pressure, because now, the situation was no longer balanced. She had pushed, and the system had responded. The associate pressed a button. The machine beeped. Different this time. Final. The screen cleared. Whatever had been there before was gone. Emily felt it immediately, that hollow drop in her chest, the realization hitting faster than she could process it. The information she had seen, the codes, the designation, whatever small piece she had managed to capture, it was no longer accessible. Not to her. Not anymore. The manager finally looked at her again, but his expression had changed. It was no longer cautious. It was settled. Your transaction has been processed, he said, placing a small printed slip on the counter, not the original receipt, but a simplified version, stripped of everything that mattered. Clean. Controlled. Safe. Emily stared at it, her fingers hovering just above the paper, not touching it, because she already knew what she would not find there. And that realization hit harder than the humiliation ever had. They had not just resisted her. They had erased the path she had started to uncover. Efficiently. Completely. Her throat tightened, her breath catching for just a second before she forced it back under control. She could feel the weight of the room shifting again, the attention no longer uncertain, no longer questioning, but settling back into place, as if the system had restored itself, as if her disruption had been corrected. The man in the back of the room had not moved, but she felt it, that attention pulling away slightly, not fully gone, but no longer focused the same way. She was no longer a variable. She was being reclassified, managed. Emily's chest rose and fell slowly, her mind racing, trying to hold on to something, anything, from what she had seen, but it was slipping, the details blurring under pressure, under the weight of everything closing in around her. She had been close. She knew it, and now it was gone. The manager stepped back slightly, creating space again, but this time it did not feel like an opportunity. It felt like dismissal. You are free to go, he said, his tone polite, but empty, as if the moment had ended and she had no place in what came next. Emily did not move. Not yet. But the strength she had built, the control she had found, it wavered, just slightly, just enough for her to feel it. The edges of her composure beginning to crack under the weight of what she had just lost. Because this was not just a moment anymore. It was proof. Proof that she had been right. And proof that she was not strong enough yet to hold on to it. Her fingers finally lowered, brushing the paper lightly, but it felt meaningless in her hands. A version of the truth that had been cleaned before she could use it. Around her, the store began to breathe again. Quiet conversations returning, subtle movement resuming, as if nothing had happened at all. And that was the worst part. How easily it all reset. How quickly she was pushed back into place. Emily swallowed, her chest tightening again, not from fear this time, but from the weight of understanding just how far behind she really was. She had stepped into something far bigger than she thought. And for the first time since she walked in, she felt it clearly. She could not win this. Not like this. Not yet. And as that realization settled in, heavy, undeniable, she felt her control slipping just enough to make one thing painfully clear: she was standing right at the edge of breaking. Emily did not realize she had stopped breathing until the air felt too heavy to hold, pressing against her chest, forcing a slow, uneven inhale that did not quite fill her lungs the way it should. Her fingers remained on the edge of the counter, barely touching the surface, as if letting go completely would make something inside her collapse faster than she could control. The paper in front of her meant nothing now. It was clean, simple, harmless, and that was exactly the problem. Everything that mattered had been taken out of it, removed before she could understand it, erased before she could use it. And the worst part was not the loss of information. It was how easily it had happened. How quickly the system had corrected itself, like she had never disrupted it at all. Around her, the world had resumed. Quiet conversations returned in soft waves. Footsteps moved again across polished floors. Someone laughed, distant, disconnected, as if none of this had ever existed. And Emily stood there, still, caught between what had just happened and what everyone else had already decided to forget. Her throat tightened again, not from tears, but from the pressure of holding everything inside. The humiliation, the realization, the sharp, undeniable truth that she had been seen, measured, and then reset. She closed her eyes for just a second, a brief escape, but it did not help. The moment replayed anyway. The dress being taken from her hands. The quiet laughter. The way no one stepped in. The way she almost walked away. And then the shift. The moment she thought she had found something. Something real. Something that mattered. Only to have it disappear just as quickly. Her chest rose and fell again. Slower this time. Controlled, but heavy. Because now she understood something she had not fully grasped before. This was not a place where you fought openly. This was not a place where you demanded answers and expected to receive them. This was a place where power moved quietly, where information was given only when it served a purpose, and where people like her were expected to leave without ever realizing what they had missed. Emily opened her eyes again, her gaze dropping briefly to the counter, then lifting just slightly, unfocused, not looking at anyone in particular. She felt smaller now, not physically, but in the way her presence seemed to shrink against the weight of everything around her. Like the space itself had pushed her back into a role she did not choose. The silence inside her stretched longer than the silence around her. And in that silence, something fragile began to break. Not loudly, not suddenly, but slowly, piece by piece. The confidence she had built, the control she thought she had gained. It slipped, not all at once, but enough for her to feel it. Enough to know how close she had come and how far she still was. Her hand finally pulled back from the counter, resting at her side. But even that small movement felt heavier than it should have, like she was letting go of something she could not name. She wanted to say something, to push back again, to reclaim even a fraction of what she had lost. But the words did not come, not because she did not have them, but because she understood now they would not matter. Not here, not like this. Her gaze drifted once more, not intentionally, but instinctively, toward the back of the room. The man was still there, unmoved, unchanged, and for a brief moment, she felt it again, that quiet, steady observation, not intrusive, not aggressive, but constant. He had seen everything, and yet, he had done nothing. That realization settled differently than before, not as fear, not as intimidation, but as something colder, something that made her chest tighten again, because it meant this was not chaos. It was control, perfect, deliberate control. Emily looked away, her focus returning inward, to the space where her thoughts were no longer scattered, but gathering. Slowly, quietly. The pain was still there. The humiliation had not faded. The loss still sat heavy in her chest. But beneath all of it, something else had begun to form. Not strength. Not yet. But clarity. She had played their game without knowing the rules. And she had lost. That much was undeniable. But now, she knew the game existed. And that changed everything. Her breathing steadied, just slightly, her posture adjusting in a way so subtle no one else would notice. She was still standing in the same place, still surrounded by the same people, still under the same system. But inside something had shifted, not outwardly, not visibly, but enough to matter. Her fingers curled slightly at her side, not in tension, but in quiet resolve. She did not look back at the receipt. She did not speak again. She did not challenge them. Not now, because now she understood the cost of doing it wrong. And as that realization settled fully into place, heavy but clear, one thought formed quietly, steady, unshaken. Next time, she would not walk in unprepared. Emily did not leave immediately, even when everything around her suggested that she should, even when the space had already reset itself as if she no longer existed within it. Instead, she stood there for 1 second longer than necessary, then another, not out of hesitation this time, but out of intention. Because now she understood something she had missed before. Leaving was not just an exit. It was a move. And moves, in a place like this, needed to be chosen, not reacted to. Her hand lifted slowly, not toward the receipt, not toward anyone, but to adjust the sleeve of her jacket, a small, controlled gesture that grounded her. Gave her a moment to reset not just her posture, but her mindset. The girl who had walked in, uncertain, reacting to every shift, trying to understand in real time, she was still there somewhere, but she was no longer in control. Something else had taken her place. Something quieter, sharper. Emily took a slow breath, her eyes moving once across the room, not searching for approval, not measuring reactions, but mapping the environment, marking positions, noting patterns. The associate was already back to routine, but her movements were more careful now. The security at the entrance had relaxed, but their attention still flickered occasionally toward the center of the room. Jason had stepped back completely, no longer part of the interaction, his presence reduced to background noise. And the man in the back, still there, still unmoved, still watching, even if no one else would admit it. Emily did not look at him directly. That was a choice, because attention, she had learned, was a form of currency here, and she would not spend it without purpose. Instead, she turned her focus inward, replaying everything not with emotion, but with structure. What triggered the reaction? What shifted the control? What caused the system to respond? Each moment, each detail, no longer a source of pain, but data, usable, valuable. She had failed. That was clear. But failure, in a system like this, was not the end. It was information. And information was the only real leverage she had. Her fingers curled slightly, then relaxed, the movement subtle, but deliberate, as if she was physically letting go of something that no longer served her. The humiliation, the frustration, the instinct to react. Gone. Or at least contained. Because now she could see it clearly. Emotion had been her weakness. Predictable. Easy to manage. Easy to control. And that was exactly how they had handled her. Efficiently. Without effort. That would not happen again. She shifted her weight slightly, then finally stepped back from the counter, not quickly, not defeated, but with a pace that matched the room itself, controlled, measured, intentional. The manager watched her, just for a second, as if confirming that the situation had resolved, but Emily did not give him anything to read. No anger, no resistance, no visible reaction at all. That was the difference. And it was enough to create a moment of uncertainty, small, but real. As she turned, her gaze passed briefly across the reflective surface of the display again, catching the faint outline of the man in the back. Still there, still observing. But this time something had changed. Not in him, in her. She did not feel the pressure the same way, did not feel the imbalance as something that needed to be corrected immediately. Instead, she saw it for what it was. Structure, hierarchy, power. And those things could be understood, could be studied, could be navigated. Step by step, Emily walked toward the exit slowly, her posture steady, her pace unhurried, but every movement now carried a different kind of weight. Not the weight of someone leaving, the weight of someone who had seen something she was not supposed to see, and remembered it. The door opened quietly as she stepped outside, the air shifting instantly, lighter, freer, but she did not relax. Not yet, not fully, because the moment had not ended. It had only changed locations. Her mind continued to move, processing, organizing, building something new out of what had just happened. She paused just outside the entrance, not turning back, not hesitating, just standing there for a brief second, her eyes focused ahead, her breathing steady, her thoughts no longer scattered, but aligned. She had walked in as someone who reacted. She was leaving as someone who observed, calculated, adapted, and that difference was everything. Because the next time she stepped into a place like that, she would not be guessing. She would not be learning in real time. She would not be controlled by what she did not understand. She would already be prepared. Her fingers adjusted slightly at her side, a small movement, but precise, controlled, final. And as she took her next step forward, there was no hesitation left in her at all. She did not feel smaller anymore. She felt different. Emily did not rush once she stepped onto the sidewalk, even though everything inside her was already moving faster than before. The city noise returned around her, distant traffic, muted conversations, the rhythm of normal life continuing without interruption, but she did not let it pull her back into anything familiar. Instead, she paused just long enough to let the environment settle around her, to separate what she had just experienced from everything else. Because now, every move mattered. Her eyes shifted slightly, not scanning randomly, but intentionally, replaying the last few minutes in her mind, isolating the fragments that had slipped through the system's control. The receipt, the category, the name that did not belong to the transaction. That was not an accident. That was a connection. And connections could be traced. Emily reached into her bag slowly, her fingers brushing past her phone before pulling it out, but she did not unlock it immediately. That was the difference now. No impulsive action. No rushed decisions. She let her mind settle first, organizing what she knew, what she had seen, and more importantly, what they believed she had not. Because that was her real advantage. They thought she had lost everything. They thought she had walked away empty. And that assumption gave her space. Emily finally unlocked her phone, her movements smooth, controlled, her expression neutral as she opened a simple note app. Nothing complex. Nothing that would draw attention if someone happened to glance her way. Then, carefully, from memory, she began to reconstruct what she had seen. The partial code, the formatting, the placement of the category line. She did not need every detail. Just enough. Just enough to test a theory. Her fingers paused for a second above the screen, then continued, adding one more piece, the name that had not belonged. She stared at it for a moment, letting it settle, letting it connect with something deeper in her memory. And then it clicked. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. She had seen that name before. Not in the store. Somewhere else. Somewhere public. Somewhere documented. Emily's breathing remained steady, but her pulse picked up just slightly, not from panic, but from recognition. This was not random. This was a network. And if that name existed outside of that store, then the system was not closed. It had edges. Entry points. She opened her browser next, not searching directly, not typing the full name immediately, but starting smaller, more controlled, testing variations, watching how the results shifted, how information surfaced and disappeared depending on how it was approached. That was the game now. Not force. Not confrontation. Precision. Her eyes narrowed slightly as something appeared on the screen, a listing, brief, almost hidden among other results. But there. The same structure. The same formatting. Not identical, but close enough to confirm it. Emily leaned against the cool surface of the building behind her, her body relaxed, her posture casual, but her mind sharp, focused. She clicked the link, not expecting much, but what opened was enough. Not a full answer, not a complete explanation, but a pattern, multiple entries, similar structures, similar categories, and more names, different people, different locations, same system. Her fingers hovered above the screen again, her thoughts aligning faster now, clearer, more precise. This was bigger than a single store, bigger than a single transaction. It was organized, structured, and most importantly, traceable. Emily closed the page slowly, not because she was done, but because she understood something critical. Information like this was not meant to be accessed directly. It had to be approached carefully, quietly, the same way they operated. She slipped her phone back into her bag, her expression unchanged, but something inside her had shifted again, stronger this time, more solid. She was no longer reacting to what they did. She was moving ahead of it, testing the edges of their system before they even realized she was still playing. A faint sound behind her made her pause, just for a second, her instincts catching it before her mind did. The door of the boutique opened again. Someone stepped out. She did not turn immediately. That was intentional. She let the moment pass, just enough to confirm what she already suspected. She was not invisible anymore. Not to them. Not after what she had done inside. But that did not change her pace. It refined it. Emily took a step forward, then another, her movements steady, controlled, as if nothing had happened at all. But inside, everything had changed. Because now she had something they did not expect her to have. A connection. A pattern. A way in. And as she walked away from the store, blending back into the rhythm of the city, one thing became clear with absolute certainty. The system that had tried to control her had just revealed more than it intended. And this time, she was the one holding the advantage. Emily had taken no more than 10 steps before she felt it again, not behind her this time, but beside her, close enough to shift the air without a word being spoken. She stopped, not abruptly, not in surprise, but with the same controlled rhythm she had carried since stepping out of the store. Then she turned. Slowly. Intentionally. And for the first time, she looked directly at him. Up close, he was not louder, not more imposing than before, but the distance between them made something clearer. The control was not in his size or his presence. It was in how little he needed to do to command everything around him. He did not speak immediately. Neither did she. The city moved behind them, cars passing, people walking, conversations blending into noise, but between them, there was a pocket of silence that did not belong to anything else. Emily held his gaze, not challenging, not submissive, just steady, as if she had already decided she would not look away first. He noticed that. She could tell, not from expression, not from movement, but from the way the silence stretched just slightly longer, like a test that had not ended yet. "You stayed longer than most would," he said finally, his voice calm, measured, not loud, but precise enough to cut through everything else. It was not a compliment. It was an observation, a classification. Emily tilted her head just slightly, considering the words before answering, not reacting to them. "Most people do not realize what is happening," she replied, her tone even, controlled, as if they were discussing something ordinary instead of what had just unfolded. A pause followed, not awkward, intentional. He studied her, not in the way Jason had, not with judgment or dismissal, but with focus, as if adjusting a variable in his mind. "And you think you do?" he asked, not mocking, not doubting, just probing. Emily felt the weight of that question, not because of the words, but because of what sat behind them. This was not about being right. This was about positioning. She could feel it clearly now. Every word mattered. Every response revealed something. So she chose carefully. "I think I saw enough," she said, her voice quieter now, but sharper because it did not need to push. It only needed to land. His eyes did not leave hers. Not for a second. And in that stillness, Emily realized something else. He was not trying to intimidate her. He was measuring her, the same way the system had measured her inside. But this was different. This was not about fitting into a category. This was about understanding how she moved when the system shifted. Around her, "You asked the wrong question in there," he said after a moment, his tone unchanged, but the meaning beneath it heavier now. Emily's fingers shifted slightly at her side, a small, controlled movement, grounding herself before responding. "No," she said calmly. "I asked the only question they did not want to answer." Another pause, longer this time. The tension did not rise. It deepened, because neither of them was trying to win this moment. They were testing it, testing each other. He took a small step closer, not invading her space, but enough to change the distance between them, enough to make the air feel different. "Curiosity can be expensive," he said, his voice lower now, not as a warning, not exactly, but as a statement that carried weight beyond the words themselves. Emily did not step back. That was the choice she made, not a reaction, a decision. Her posture remained steady, her gaze unchanged. "So is silence," she replied, just as quietly. And that shifted something. Not visibly, not in a way anyone else would notice. But she felt it. That subtle recalibration, that moment where the balance between them adjusted just enough to become unpredictable. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he watched her, longer this time, as if reconsidering something he had already decided. Emily held her ground, her breathing even, her thoughts clear, no longer searching for what to say, but choosing when to say it. Because this was not a conversation. This was positioning. Every word placed. Every silence intentional. Finally, he spoke again, his tone returning to something more neutral, but not less controlled. "You should be careful with what you think you understand," he said. Emily allowed a small pause before answering, just enough to show she had heard it, considered it, but not accepted it. "And you should be careful with what you assume I do not," she replied. The city noise pressed in around them again, filling the space that had been held so tightly between them, but the tension did not break. It held, unresolved. He stepped back slightly, not retreating, just resetting the distance, the balance shifting once more, but not settling. Emily did not move, not until he did. And even then, she did not follow his gaze, did not turn to watch him leave, because that would have given something away. Instead, she remained, exactly where she was, her posture calm, her expression unchanged, but her mind sharper than it had ever been. Because now she understood something she had not before. This was not just a system. It was a game. And this was the first move where both players knew they were no longer playing alone. Emily did not move until the silence between them finally broke, not with words, but with absence. He stepped away first, not abruptly, not dismissively, just enough to signal that the moment, at least on the surface, had ended. But nothing about it felt finished. Not to her. Not anymore. She remained still for a second longer, her gaze fixed ahead, her mind already replaying every word, every pause, every shift in tone. Because now she understood something she had not before. Information was never given directly in this world. It was layered, hidden, measured out in fragments that only made sense if you knew how to look at them. And he had just given her something. Not an answer, not even a clear hint, but a direction. You asked the wrong question. The sentence echoed in her mind, sharper now, heavier than when he first said it. At the time, it felt like a correction. Now it felt like a clue. Emily exhaled slowly, her posture relaxing just enough to blend back into the rhythm of the street, but her thoughts did not slow down. They sharpened. If the question she asked inside was wrong, then what was the right one? She had assumed the system was filtering people based on appearance, status, behavior. That part was true. She had seen it happen. She had experienced it. But what if that was not the purpose? What if it was only the surface? Her steps began to move again, steady, unhurried, her eyes forward, but her attention turned inward, dissecting everything. The receipt, the coded structure, the name that did not belong. And now his reaction. He had not denied anything. He had not corrected her assumptions. He had only shifted her perspective. That meant one thing. She had been looking at the system from the wrong angle. Emily's fingers tightened slightly at her side, not in tension, but in focus. Because if the goal was not simply to judge, then what was it? Her pace slowed just slightly as the thought settled deeper. Testing. Not just who belonged, but how they responded when they did not. The humiliation, the pressure, the isolation. It was not just about pushing people out. It was about watching what they did under that pressure. Who walked away? Who argued? Who adapted? Who learned? Emily stopped walking for a brief second, the realization hitting with quiet clarity. She had not been rejected. She had been evaluated. And that changed everything. Because evaluation meant selection. And selection meant purpose. Her eyes narrowed slightly, her breathing steady, as the pieces began to shift into a new alignment. Jason's role. Too confident. Too precise. The associate's behavior. Too automatic. The manager. Too controlled. None of them had acted randomly. They had followed a pattern. A script. Which meant they were not the ones making the real decisions. They were executing them. Emily's gaze lifted slightly, scanning the street without really seeing it, her thoughts moving faster now, connecting the last missing piece. Him. The man in the back. The one who did not act. The one who only observed. The one who spoke only after everything else had played out. He was not part of the system. He was above it, or at least outside of its visible structure. And that meant something else. The evaluation was not for the store. It was for him. Emily felt a subtle shift in her chest. Not fear, not excitement, but something colder. Something more precise. Because that meant the humiliation she experienced was not just collateral. It was intentional, designed to provoke a reaction, to reveal something. And the way she responded had been seen, measured, judged. Her jaw tightened slightly, the weight of that realization settling deeper. She had thought she was uncovering the system. But in reality, the system had been uncovering her. Emily resumed walking, her pace steady again, but now every step carried a different kind of awareness. Because this was no longer just about power. It was about selection. And selection always had a purpose. The question was what kind? Her mind returned to the receipt again, to the category line she had seen for only a fraction of a second. Not a product, not a price, a classification. At the time, it had felt like a label. Now it felt like something else. A designation. A placement. As if the transaction itself was secondary. As if the real record was not what was bought, but who was involved. Emily's breath slowed, her thoughts narrowing in on that single detail. Because if that was true, then the receipt was never about money. It was about tracking, categorizing, marking people inside a system she had only just begun to see. And suddenly, the humiliation inside the store felt even more calculated than before. Not random, not personal, Functional. A step in a process she had not agreed to be part of. Her fingers curled slightly again, but this time not from emotion. From decision. Because if she had been marked, then she was already inside it. Whether she wanted to be or not. And that meant walking away was no longer an option. Not if she wanted to understand what she had just stepped into. Not if she wanted control. Emily slowed again, just slightly, her eyes focusing ahead as a new thought surfaced, quieter, but sharper than anything before it. If the system had categorized her, then somewhere, there was a record of that. And if there was a record, then she was no longer just someone who walked into that store. She was already part of something much larger. Something that had seen her long before she realized she was being watched. Emily had not gone far when she heard his voice again, not loud, not calling after her, but placed carefully into the space behind her, as if it had always been there waiting. If you keep walking like that, he said, calm and even, you will miss the part that actually matters. She stopped, not immediately, but after one more step, just enough to show that the decision to turn back was hers, not his. Then she did. Slowly, deliberately. He stood a few feet away now, closer than before, but still outside her space, maintaining that same invisible line neither of them had crossed. Emily studied him for a moment, not openly, not obviously, but with the same measured attention she had learned to use. This was not about presence anymore. It was about function. What role he played, what position he held, and more importantly, what he wanted. You assume I am missing something, she replied, her tone steady, controlled, revealing nothing beyond what she chose to show. A faint pause followed, not long, but intentional. No, he said, his gaze steady, unwavering. I know. You are. Emily felt the weight of that statement, not as a challenge, but as a test. Everything with him was a test. Every word, every silence. And now, she understood the rules well enough to play. Then you should be more specific, she said, her voice softer now, not defensive, but precise, as if she was adjusting her approach rather than reacting. Another pause. He did not answer immediately, and that alone told her something important. He was deciding how much to reveal, which meant there was something to reveal. What you saw inside, he said finally, was not the system. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly, not in confusion, but in focus. Then what was it? She asked, her tone even, but carrying just enough weight to show that she was no longer asking blindly. He held her gaze for a second longer this time, as if recalibrating again, then answered. An entry point. The words settled slowly, heavier than they sounded, because of what they implied. Not the system, just a door. Emily felt the shift immediately, her thoughts adjusting, expanding, reorganizing everything she had just concluded. If that was only an entry point, then everything she had seen so far was only surface level. Controlled exposure. Designed to filter, to observe, to select. And suddenly, the scale of what she was dealing with expanded beyond anything she had initially considered. She exhaled slowly, her posture unchanged, but her mind sharper now, more aligned. And you are offering to show me what is behind it? She asked, not as a request, not as an invitation, but as a calculation. Because nothing in this world was offered without a reason. He did not smile. He did not confirm it directly. I am offering you a choice, he said instead, his voice calm, controlled, but carrying that same underlying weight she had begun to recognize. You can walk away now, and everything you saw becomes irrelevant. A brief pause, then quieter. Or you can step further in and accept what comes with that. Emily held his gaze, her breathing steady, her thoughts moving quickly beneath the surface. This was not an offer of help. It was an alignment of interests. He was not giving her access. He was testing whether she was worth giving access to. And that meant one thing. He needed something too. Not from her directly, but from what she represented. Her reaction, her adaptability, her willingness to step into something she did not fully understand. Emily let the silence stretch just long enough to make it clear she was considering, not hesitating. Because hesitation had no place here anymore. Only calculation. And what do you get out of it? She asked finally, her tone quiet, but direct, cutting through the surface of the offer to the part that actually mattered. This time, the pause was slightly longer. Not by much, but enough. Clarity, he said. A simple word, but not a simple answer. Emily felt it immediately. That was not the full truth. Not even close. But it was enough to confirm what she already knew. This was not trust. This was not partnership. This was mutual use. Temporary alignment. Two sides moving toward different goals, using the same path. And that made it dangerous, because anything built on that kind of balance could shift at any moment. Emily straightened slightly, not visibly, but enough to settle her own position in the exchange. Then we are not working together, she said calmly. We are just not in each other's way. His gaze did not change, but something in the silence between them did. Recognition, agreement, or at least acceptance of the terms as she defined them. For now, he replied. Emily gave the smallest nod, not as confirmation, but as acknowledgement. That was enough. No more words were needed, because everything else would be proven through action. She turned again, this time without pause, her steps steady, controlled, but now carrying a different kind of weight. Not uncertainty, not reaction, but direction. She had not accepted his offer. Not fully, but she had not rejected it either. She had positioned herself inside it. Carefully, strategically, on her terms. And as she moved forward, one thought settled clearly, firmly, without hesitation. This was not a partnership. It was a risk, one that could give her access to everything she needed or destroy whatever control she had just started to build. Emily did not stop walking, but her pace slowed just enough for the weight of his words to catch up with her, settling into her thoughts like something that refused to be ignored. A choice. That was what he had called it. Simple, clean, almost neutral. But nothing about it felt simple now. Because for the first time, since she stepped into this, she understood the real cost of that choice. It was not about stepping in or walking away. It was about what she would have to become if she stayed. Her fingers brushed lightly against the side of her coat, a small, grounding motion, but her mind was anything but steady. It moved between two paths, both clear, both dangerous in different ways. One was familiar, controlled distance. No trust. No reliance. Just observation, strategy, slow progression. Safe. Predictable. The version of herself she had just started to build. The other was uncertain. Faster. Riskier. It meant allowing access. Not trust, not fully, but proximity. Enough for him to influence the direction she moved. Enough for her to lose control if she miscalculated. And that was the part that unsettled her. Not him. Not the system. But the possibility that she could make the wrong move and not realize it until it was too late. Emily exhaled slowly, her breath steady, but heavier now, as if something inside her was being pulled in two directions at once. Because beneath all the logic, beneath all the calculation, there was something else she could not completely ignore. A question, not about the system, not about the structure, about him. He had not forced her, had not manipulated her directly. Had not even tried to convince her in the way someone seeking control usually would. He had offered space, choice, and that made it more dangerous, not less, because it created the illusion that she was still in control. Emily's steps slowed further, her gaze lowering slightly, not in hesitation, but in focus, as she examined that thought more carefully. Illusion, that was the word, because even choice, in a system like this, could be structured, guided, designed to lead her exactly where they wanted her to go. And if she stepped forward without recognizing that, then everything she had learned so far meant nothing. Her jaw tightened slightly, not in frustration, but in clarity, because now she could see it. The emotional pull was subtle, not obvious, not overwhelming, but present. The idea that he was different, that he was outside the system, that he might be useful in a way that did not come with the same cost. That was the trap, not trust. Not connection, just enough of both to make her lower her guard. Emily stopped walking completely this time, standing still for just a second as the city moved around her, indifferent, distant. Her eyes closed briefly, not to escape, but to center herself, to separate what she felt from what she knew. Because those two things were no longer aligned. And that misalignment was dangerous. When she opened her eyes again, the hesitation was gone. Not because the choice had become easier, but because she had removed the part of it that did not belong. Emotion, hope, the idea that this could be anything other than what it was. A calculated risk, a controlled interaction, a temporary alignment that could shift at any moment. She turned her head slightly, not fully looking back, just enough to acknowledge the direction he had been standing, as if confirming something to herself rather than to him. Then she spoke, her voice quiet, steady, carrying none of the uncertainty that had existed before. "If I step in," she said, not turning fully, not giving him the satisfaction of a direct reaction, "it is not because I trust you." A brief pause. Then, sharper, "It is because I understand the value of what you represent." The silence that followed was different now. Not testing, not uncertain. It was defined. Because the terms had changed. She was no longer responding to his offer. She was reframing it, taking control of how it would exist between them. Emily did not wait for his response. That was intentional, because she did not need his confirmation. She had already made her decision. Not to trust, not to connect, but to use the opportunity in front of her without allowing it to shape her. Her steps resumed, steady, controlled, but now carrying a new kind of weight. Not hesitation, not internal conflict, but resolution, because she had chosen her side. Not him, not the system, herself. And whatever came next, she would meet it the same way she had just decided to move forward. Cold, calculated, and entirely in control. Emily did not slow down again, but everything inside her had shifted into a different rhythm, one that no longer reacted to the moment, but moved ahead of it. Her steps were steady, her expression neutral, but her mind was already constructing something far more complex than anything she had done before. Not a reaction, not a single move, a structure, layered, controlled, designed, because she understood now that one move was never enough. Not in a system like this. Not against people who operated several steps ahead without ever showing it. Her fingers brushed lightly against her bag again, a small motion, but it grounded her focus as she began to sort through what she had, not emotionally, but strategically. Information, limited but precise. A name, a pattern, a system that categorized people instead of transactions. And most importantly, a point of entry. That boutique was not the system. It was the filter, which meant the real structure existed somewhere else. Somewhere deeper. Somewhere that required more than just curiosity to reach. Emily's eyes lifted slightly as she crossed the street, her movements blending seamlessly into the flow of the city, but her thoughts were no longer part of it. They were building something separate, something intentional. First layer, information control. She would not approach the system directly again. Not yet. Instead, she would expand what she knew without being seen doing it. The names she had found were not random. They were connected, logged, structured. That meant there were more. And if there were more, then there was a pattern that could be mapped. Not quickly, not obviously, but methodically, quietly. Second layer, human variables. People inside the system were predictable because they followed rules. But people outside of it were not. And that was where advantage existed. The associate, the manager, even Jason. They were not the system. They were extensions of it. And extensions could be influenced. Not directly, not aggressively, but through pressure points. Timing, context. Emily's lips pressed together slightly as she considered that, her mind already selecting where to apply it, where to observe, where to test. Third layer, him, the most unpredictable variable, not because he was chaotic, but because he was controlled in a way that did not follow the same visible structure. He was not inside the system. He was connected to it, and that made him both an access point and a risk. Emily did not need to trust him. She had already decided that, but she could use his position, his perspective, his willingness to engage, not as a guide, but as a signal, a way to confirm what she could not see directly. She turned a corner without slowing, her pace unchanged, but the plan forming more clearly with each step. This would not be fast. That was the first rule. Anything that moved too quickly in a system like this was noticed, and anything noticed too early was removed. No, this would be gradual, controlled, each layer building on the last, each move small enough to avoid attention, but precise enough to shift the outcome over time. Emily reached into her bag again, this time pulling out her phone, not to search, not to act, but to mark a single note. One line, a name, a connection. Then she locked the screen again, slipping it back without hesitation. No overthinking, no second guessing. That was another rule now. Decisions made, then executed. Her gaze lifted as she approached another intersection, the city lights shifting slightly as the sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the pavement. And for the first time since she stepped into the boutique, she felt something else settle into place. Not emotion, Not anger. Control. Not complete. Not yet. But growing. Because now she was no longer inside their system reacting to their moves. She was outside it, building her own. A system designed not to confront theirs directly, but to surround it. Slowly, quietly, until the outcome was no longer theirs to decide. A car passed beside her, the sound sharp against the steady rhythm of her thoughts, but she did not break focus. Because she knew something now that changed everything. They believed the moment had ended. They believed she had walked away. And that assumption was the foundation of her entire plan. Emily's steps did not slow, but her awareness sharpened again as she felt something subtle in the air, not behind her, not directly visible, but present. A shift, a tension, not enough to confirm, but enough to consider. And that was the final layer. Contingency. Because no plan survived unchanged. Not in a system like this. Not with people like him watching. Her fingers curled slightly, not in tension, but in readiness, as her mind adjusted, refining the structure she had just built, reinforcing the parts that could break, tightening the ones that mattered most. She did not look back. She did not pause. But she knew. Something had already started moving. Not her plan. Theirs. And as the distance between her and the boutique grew, one thought settled in with quiet certainty, steady, unshaken, and increasingly dangerous. This was no longer about understanding the system. It was about who would control it first. And somewhere behind her, unseen, unspoken, the clock had already started ticking. Emily felt it before she saw it. That subtle fracture in the rhythm she had just established, a disruption so small it could have been ignored if she had still been the person she was an hour ago. But she was not. Her steps slowed by a fraction, her attention sharpening, pulling away from the structure of her plan and locking onto something else. A pattern that did not fit. She reached the corner and paused, not fully stopping, just enough to let the moment stretch, to give herself time to observe without drawing attention. Then she saw it. Across the street, reflected faintly in the glass of a passing car, a figure she did not recognize, standing too still, too aligned with her pace, not following, not approaching, but present in a way that felt deliberate. Emily did not turn her head. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she adjusted her movement slightly, stepping forward again, then slowing near a storefront, just enough to alter her timing. The reflection shifted. The figure adjusted. Not by much, but enough. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with recalibration. This was not part of her plan. Not yet. She had accounted for observation, for indirect pressure. But not this. Not active tracking. Her mind moved quickly, reorganizing, stripping away assumptions that no longer held. If she was being watched now, it meant one of two things. Either she had been flagged faster than expected, or she had underestimated how quickly the system responded to deviation. Neither option was good. Emily stepped into the store without hesitation, not because she needed anything, but because she needed a controlled environment, a place where variables could be narrowed. The shift from open street to enclosed space changed everything instantly. Reflections multiplied, angles tightened, movement became easier to track. She moved slowly down one aisle, her gaze forward, but her awareness spread outward, mapping the space, identifying entry points, exits, blind spots. Then, casually, she reached for an item, lifting it just enough to use the polished surface as a mirror. The reflection confirmed it. He had followed. Not close, not aggressively, but consistently. That was enough. Emily set the item back down, her movement smooth, unhurried, but inside. Her plan was already adjusting, layers shifting, some collapsing entirely. The assumption that she could operate unnoticed gone. The belief that she had time to build quietly, compromised. Her fingers brushed lightly against her bag again, not out of habit this time, but as a signal to herself. Reset. Adapt. She moved toward the back of the store, not directly, but in a curved path, changing direction just enough to test the response. The reflection shifted again. Confirmed. He was not random. He was assigned. That meant something else. This was no longer passive observation. This was containment in motion. Emily's breathing remained steady, but her thoughts accelerated, cutting through possibilities, eliminating options that no longer applied. She could not confront. Not here. Not now. That would escalate too quickly. She could not run. That would confirm too much. She needed to regain control without revealing that she had lost it. Her eyes flicked once toward the exit, then away, dismissing it. Too predictable. Instead, she turned into another aisle, then another, her pace unchanged, but her path becoming less linear, more fragmented, testing the limits of his response. Each adjustment confirmed the same thing. He adapted with her, not anticipating, not leading, but following with precision. That was the problem. Emily felt the first real crack in her control, not visible, not external, but internal. The realization that this variable was not one she could immediately outmaneuver. Not with the information she had, not with the time she thought she had. She reached the far end of the store and stopped, not abruptly, but as if she had simply found what she was looking for. Her hand rested lightly against the shelf, her posture calm, her breathing even, but her mind was no longer building forward. It was stabilizing, containing the damage, because now the equation had changed. She was not just observing the system anymore. The system was actively adjusting to her. Her reflection caught her own eyes for a brief second, steady, controlled, but sharper now, more aware than before. This was not failure. Not yet. But it was not progress either. It was interference. And interference meant one thing. She was no longer operating ahead of the system. She was inside its response cycle. And that was exactly where she did not want to be. Emily straightened slightly, her fingers relaxing at her side, her posture resetting, but the clarity in her mind had shifted. Not weaker, but more precise. Because now she understood something she had not accounted for. The system did not wait. It did not observe passively. It moved, quietly, efficiently, and sooner than she had expected. And as that realization settled fully into place, cold and undeniable, one thought formed with absolute certainty. Her plan had already started to break, and she was running out of time to fix it. Emily did not panic. That was the difference. The realization hit her fast, sharp, undeniable, but instead of collapsing under it, she let it settle, let it define the new boundaries of the situation. Because now the rules had changed. And when the rules changed, you did not fight them. You adapted faster than they expected. Her hand slid off the shelf, her posture straightening, her breathing steady, as if nothing inside her had shifted at all. But everything had. She was no longer trying to stay ahead of the system. She was inside it now, which meant the only way forward was to move like it did. Quiet, precise, invisible in motion. Emily turned slightly, not toward the exit, not toward the figure behind her, but toward the center of the store, where movement was more natural, less predictable. Her pace adjusted, just enough to blend into the rhythm of other shoppers, not leading, not hesitating, just flowing. The reflection followed. Of course it did. But this time, she did not test it. She accepted it. That was the first shift. Stop reacting. Start using. Her fingers slipped into her bag again, but slower now, controlled, deliberate, as she pulled out her phone without looking at it directly. No sudden movements. No hesitation. Just part of the environment. She unlocked it with one hand, her gaze still forward, and opened a blank message thread. Not to send. Not yet. To prepare. Her mind moved quickly, recalibrating the layers of her plan, stripping away what no longer applied, reinforcing what still held. The boutique was no longer her entry point. That path was compromised. But the system itself was still structured, still dependent on patterns. And patterns could be redirected. Emily turned down another aisle, her shoulder brushing lightly past a display, creating a small, natural disturbance. Just enough. Behind her, the reflection shifted again, adjusting, correcting. Predictable. That was the key. The system adapted, but it adapted within its own logic. And logic could be manipulated. Her thumb moved across the screen, typing quickly but precisely, not a full message, just fragments. A name, a location, a time. Then she stopped. Not sending it. Not yet. Because timing was everything. She needed the system to respond before she revealed her move. Emily reached the end of the aisle and paused briefly, picking up an item, turning it in her hand as if considering it, but her attention was elsewhere. She counted silently. 1, 2, 3. Then she moved again, this time toward the front of the store, her pace slightly faster, not enough to signal urgency, but enough to create a shift in momentum. The reflection followed. Closer now. More direct. Good. That was what she needed. Confirmation. She stepped into a narrower space between displays, where visibility tightened, where movement became more constrained. The kind of place where tracking required adjustment, where patterns became more obvious. And then, as she stopped, not gradually, not subtly, completely, the sudden stillness forced a reaction. The reflection hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. But that was enough. Emily saw it. The break in rhythm. The moment where control was not absolute. Her lips pressed together slightly, not in tension, but in recognition. That was the opening. Small, but real. Her thumb moved again, this time finishing the message. Then, without looking down, without changing her posture, she pressed send. The message was simple. No explanation. No context. Just data. But she knew exactly where it was going. Not to him. Not to anyone inside the store. To an external node. One of the names she had found earlier. One of the connections that existed outside the system's immediate control. And that was the second shift. Expand the field. Force the system to react beyond its comfort zone. Emily exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just slightly as she placed the item back on the shelf, her movements smooth, unhurried, as if nothing had happened at all. But inside, the countdown had started. Because now the system was no longer containing her. It was about to be engaged from the outside. She turned toward the exit again, her pace steady, her expression unchanged, but her awareness sharper than ever. Behind her, the reflection moved again, but this time, it was different. Less certain. More reactive. And that was the first real sign. The balance was shifting. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. As she stepped out of the store and back into the open air, her phone vibrated once in her hand. A small, controlled signal, but the weight of it was everything. Emily did not check it immediately. She did not need to, because she already knew what it meant. The system had responded, but not in the way it expected. And for the first time since this began, she was no longer being tracked. She was being acknowledged. Emily did not check her phone immediately, not because she was unsure, but because she already understood the weight of what had just shifted. A single vibration. Controlled. Precise. That was not noise. That was confirmation. She stepped forward into the flow of the street, her posture calm, her pace steady, but something around her had changed, something subtle but undeniable, like the air itself had recalibrated to a new center. Her center. The figure who had been following her did not disappear. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he slowed. Not stopping, not retreating, but adjusting. And that was the first signal. The system was no longer leading. It was responding. Emily let that settle, not as a victory, but as a position. Because position was everything. Her fingers tightened slightly around her phone before finally lifting it, her gaze dropping for just a second, just enough to read the message without breaking the rhythm of her movement. No greeting. No explanation. Just a line. We have a record of your classification. Emily's eyes did not widen. Her breath did not change. But inside, everything aligned. That was it. Not just access. Not just connection. Leverage. Real leverage. Because the system that had categorized her had been mirrored somewhere else. Tracked. Stored. Exposed. And now, she was holding a piece of it. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a fraction of a second, then locked it again, slipping the phone back into her bag without hesitation. No response yet. Timing mattered more than reaction. She crossed the street again, her steps unhurried, her presence blending seamlessly into the movement around her. But her awareness had sharpened to something else entirely. Because now she was not just navigating the system. She was influencing it. Behind her, the followers shifted again, this time, creating more distance instead of closing it. Subtle, controlled, but different. And that difference spread. She felt it ripple outward, not just from him, but from the invisible structure he was connected to. A recalibration, a hesitation, a question. Who is she now? Emily did not look back. She did not need to, because power, she had learned, was not in being seen. It was in being understood differently. She turned another corner, her pace steady, but her direction now intentional, leading toward a space she had already chosen, a location where visibility increased, where anonymity decreased, where systems like theirs preferred to remain quiet. Public exposure was not their strength. It was their weakness, and she was about to use it. As she approached the glass doors of a larger building, Her reflection caught her eye for just a second, and what she saw was no longer uncertainty, no longer reaction. It was control. Not complete, not absolute, but real. She stepped inside, the environment shifting instantly, brighter, more open, filled with movement that could not be easily contained or controlled. And that was where she stopped. Not at the entrance, not hidden, right in the center of it. Her phone vibrated again. This time, she checked it immediately. A second message. They are adjusting your status. Emily's lips pressed together slightly, not in tension, but in recognition. Status. That was the word. That was what the receipt had really been. Not a transaction. A placement. And now, that placement was no longer stable, because she had disrupted it from outside. She lifted her head slightly, her gaze scanning the space around her, not looking for anyone specific, but feeling the shift, the subtle change in how people moved, how attention flickered, how something unseen was recalculating in real time. This was the moment, the first real break, the point where the system was no longer operating with certainty, and uncertainty was power. Emily reached into her bag again, pulling out her phone once more, but this time she did not hesitate. Her fingers moved quickly, deliberately, sending a single response. Not long, not detailed, just enough. Then update it. She pressed send. And just like that, she forced their hand. No more observation. No more quiet classification. Now they had to act. And action meant exposure. The ripple spread faster this time. She could feel it, not as fear, not as panic, but as disruption. The follower behind her stopped completely. Not hiding it. Not adjusting. Just stopping. That was new. That was visible. That was a break in control. Emily did not turn around. She did not acknowledge it. Because she did not need to. The reaction had already confirmed everything. She had shifted the balance. Not temporarily. Not subtly. But enough to force the system to recognize her as something other than a variable. As something active. As she stood there, still, composed, her presence anchored in a space they could not easily manipulate, the weight of that shift became clear. The system was no longer watching her to classify. It was watching her to respond. And for the first time, the people connected to it, visible or not, were no longer certain how to do that without consequence. Because now, Emily Carter was no longer someone they could quietly control. She was someone they had to account for. And that changed everything. Around her, movement slowed just slightly. Subtle glances exchanged, the kind that were not meant to be noticed, but she saw them anyway. The hesitation, the recalculation, the quiet, unspoken recognition that something had shifted. And as that awareness settled into the space around her, one thing became undeniable. They were no longer just observing her. They were cautious. Emily did not need to turn to know he was there again. But this time it was different, not because of his presence, but because of what it carried with it. The air around her shifted, not with control, not with quiet dominance, but with something else, something sharper, less contained. She felt it before she saw it. Then she turned. Slowly. Intentionally. And this time, he was already watching her, not from a distance, not from the shadows, but directly, without the buffer he had kept before. That alone was the first break. The space between them was smaller now, not physically, but in control. And Emily saw it instantly. Not in his posture, not in his stance, but in the way his gaze held hers a fraction longer than before, as if recalculating, as if adjusting to something he had not anticipated. She did not speak. She did not move. She simply held that moment, letting it stretch, letting him feel the shift the same way she did. Because this time she was not being evaluated. She was being responded to. You forced a reaction, he said finally, his voice still calm, still measured, but something underneath it had changed. It was not as clean, not as controlled. There was weight there now. Pressure. Emily tilted her head slightly, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharper, more certain. No, she replied quietly. I revealed one. The silence that followed was different. It did not belong to him anymore. It did not belong to the system. It existed between them, shared, unstable, shifting with every second that passed. He took a small step closer, not enough to invade her space, but enough to close the gap that had once defined their dynamic. And for the first time, Emily did not feel smaller in that space. She felt equal, maybe not in power, not yet, but in position, and that was enough. You are playing a dangerous game, he said, his tone lower now, not as detached as before, not as observational. There was something else in it, something closer to warning or frustration. Emily noticed it immediately. That shift, that crack, small, but real. Her fingers relaxed at her side, her posture steady, her voice calm when she answered. So are you. He did not respond right away. And that was the second break. Because before, he always had an answer, always had control over the rhythm, the direction, the outcome of the exchange. Now there was a pause. Not strategic, not intentional, just there. Emily felt it, the balance shifting further, not dramatically, not completely, but enough to make something clear. He was no longer ahead of her. He was catching up. You should not have expanded the field, he said finally. But the words landed differently now, not as a correction, not as a controlled observation, but as something closer to resistance. As if he was reacting to her move instead of defining it. Emily let that settle, her gaze steady, her mind precise, recognizing what he had just revealed without meaning to. You did not expect me to, she said softly. Not a question, a statement. His jaw tightened, just slightly, almost invisible, but she saw it. She felt it. That moment where control slipped just enough to be noticed. And that changed everything. Because now she understood something she had not fully seen before. He was not immune to the system. He was part of it. Not in the same way as the others. Not controlled, but connected. And her actions had disrupted that connection in ways he could not immediately contain. Emily took a small step forward this time. Not aggressive, not confrontational, but deliberate, placing herself fully into the space between them, not shrinking from it, not adjusting to him, meeting him. And that was the third break. Because now, she was no longer responding to his position. She was establishing her own. You said it was an entry point, she continued, her voice calm, but carrying more weight now, more certainty. So I stepped in. Another pause. Longer this time. He did not interrupt. He did not redirect. He listened. And that was new. Emily held his gaze, her expression unchanged, but inside, she felt it clearly. The shift was real. Not complete. Not final. But undeniable. The difference is, she added quietly, I did not stop where you expected me to. The silence stretched again, but this time it did not feel like a test. It felt like something else. Something unstable. Because for the first time, he did not have immediate control over what came next. His eyes did not leave hers, but there was something different in them now. Not just observation. Not just calculation. Something closer to conflict. Internal. Unresolved. Emily saw it, recognized it, and understood exactly what it meant. She had crossed a line he had not prepared for. And now, he was the one adjusting. Not her. The space between them held that tension, sharp, unspoken, building with every second that passed. And then, finally, he exhaled, a quiet sound, controlled, but not as precise as before. You are changing the rules, he said, but this time, it did not sound like control. It sounded like realization. And beneath it, something else. Something he could not fully hide anymore. He was no longer certain how to contain her. Emily did not speak right away, not because she did not have the words, but because for the first time, she did not need to guess anymore. Everything that had been fragmented, hidden in patterns and half-seen reflections, had finally aligned. Not through what he said, but through what he could no longer control. Her gaze held his, steady, unshaken, and in that silence, she saw it clearly. The structure, the system, the truth. It was never about the store, she said slowly, her voice quiet, but carrying a weight that had not existed before. Not a question, not a theory, a conclusion. He did not interrupt. He did not correct her. And that was confirmation. Emily took a slow breath, her chest rising, not from hesitation, but from the sheer clarity of what she was about to say next, the way it pressed against her, demanding to be spoken, because now it was undeniable. You built a filtering system, she continued, her eyes never leaving his, her tone sharpening with each word. Not to sell anything, not to serve anyone, but to identify people. A brief pause. Then, deeper. To test them. The words hung in the air, heavy, irreversible. And still, he did not deny it. Emily felt it then, that surge, not chaotic, not overwhelming, but powerful, controlled, rising from something deeper than anger. Understanding. The clothes, she said, her voice tightening slightly, not breaking, but intensifying. The judgment. The humiliation. None of that was random. Her fingers curled slightly at her side, the memory flashing back with a clarity that no longer hurt in the same way. Because now it made sense. You needed pressure, she said. You needed to see how people react when they are pushed, when they are isolated, when they are made to feel small. Her jaw tightened, her voice dropping just slightly, not weaker, but heavier. You needed to know who breaks and who adapts. The silence around them deepened, not empty, but full, charged with everything that had been unspoken until now. Emily took a step closer, not aggressive, not confrontational, but deliberate, as if closing the distance between what had happened and what it meant. And the receipt, she continued, her voice steady again, sharper now, more precise. It was never about the purchase. Her eyes narrowed slightly, locking onto him with absolute certainty. It was a record, a classification, another pause. But this time she did not wait. You tagged me the moment I walked in. The words landed. Fully. Completely. And for the first time she saw it. Not control. Not calculation. Something else. Recognition. He exhaled slowly, the sound quiet, controlled, but no longer perfect. And that was all she needed. Because now there was nothing left to question. Emily felt it rise fully then. Not just understanding, not just clarity, but something deeper, something that had been building since the moment she stepped into that store. The humiliation, the way they looked at her, the way they decided who she was before she even spoke. It was not personal. And somehow, that made it worse. Because it meant it had been done before. Repeated. Refined. Systematic. You turned people into data, she said, her voice no longer quiet, no longer restrained, but still controlled, still precise, every word landing exactly where it needed to. You reduced them to reactions, to variables, to something you could measure and categorize like it did not matter. Her chest tightened, but she did not lose control. Not now. Not when everything was finally clear. And you think that gives you power. The silence that followed was different now. Not shared. Not balanced. It belonged to her. Because she was no longer trying to understand him. She already did. She stepped closer again, not breaking the space, but redefining it. Her presence no longer reactive, no longer defensive. It was anchored, certain. But you made one mistake, she said, her voice lowering, not softer, but sharper, more dangerous because of how controlled it was. You assumed the people you tested would never see the system. Her gaze did not waver. Not for a second. You assumed they would walk away. A brief pause. Then, final. I did not. The words settled into the space between them, not loud, not explosive, but absolute. And in that moment, Emily felt it completely. The shift, not just in power, but in purpose. Because now this was no longer about understanding what had happened to her. It was about what she was going to do with it. The humiliation she felt was no longer something to carry. It was something to use. The system that reduced her to a category was now something she could expose. Disrupt. Control. Her fingers relaxed at her side, her posture steady, her breathing even, but her eyes were different now. Not searching, not questioning. Certain. You wanted to see how I would respond, she said quietly. Now you know. He did not answer. Not immediately. And he did not need to. Because everything had already been said. Emily turned slightly, not fully leaving, but shifting her position, as if the moment had already moved past him, past the conversation, into something larger. Because it had. And as she took her next step, her voice came one last time, calm, controlled, but carrying something that could no longer be contained. You built this system to control people, she said. I am going to use it to break you. The air around them tightened, the weight of her words settling into something final, something irreversible. Because now, this was no longer about being part of the system. It was about taking it apart. And for the first time since this began, there was no hesitation left in her at all. No doubt. No uncertainty. Only direction. Because what had been done to her was not just unfair. It was deliberate. And that meant one thing. What came next would not just be reaction. It would be justice. Emily did not look back again after she spoke those words, not because the moment lacked weight, but because it had already settled into something irreversible. The line had been crossed. Not by accident. Not by reaction. But by decision. And now, everything that followed would carry the consequence of that choice. Her steps were steady as she moved through the building, her posture calm, but her awareness heightened to a level that made every detail sharper, clearer, more precise. This was no longer about uncovering the system. It was about preparing to confront it. And confrontation required more than understanding. It required timing, position, control. Her phone vibrated again, a subtle signal, but she did not rush to check it. That was deliberate, because now, every action she took was part of something larger. She reached the far end of the lobby, stopping briefly near a glass wall that overlooked the street below, her reflection faintly visible against the shifting city lights. For a moment, she simply stood there, her gaze steady, her breathing even, as if anchoring herself before what came next. Then she lifted her phone. The message was longer this time. Structured, detailed, a list of names, locations, timestamps. Not random, not fragmented. A network. The same pattern she had seen earlier, now expanded. Confirmed. And beneath it, one line. They are consolidating. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition. Consolidation meant movement. It meant the system was no longer operating in isolated layers. It was pulling together, centralizing, preparing. And that meant one thing. They had recognized the threat. Not just her, but what she represented. Her fingers tightened slightly around the phone before relaxing again, her mind already adjusting, recalculating, refining the structure she had built. Because this was the moment where plans either held or collapsed. She exhaled slowly, her gaze lifting from the screen, her focus returning outward, but her thoughts moving faster than ever. Every piece was now in motion. The external node she had activated. The internal system that was reacting. The man behind her who had lost control but not influence. And herself, positioned between all of it. Not inside, not outside, but at the point where everything intersected. That was where power existed now. Emily turned slightly, her reflection shifting with her, her expression unchanged, but her presence different. Sharper, more defined, because she was no longer preparing to survive the system. She was preparing to force it into a position where it could not hide. Her steps resumed, moving away from the glass, deeper into the building, toward a space she had already chosen, not randomly, but with intention. A place where visibility and structure overlapped, where systems like theirs were forced to operate carefully or risk exposure. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and she stepped inside without hesitation, her movements smooth, controlled, as if this was just another moment in a normal day. But it was not. The doors closed behind her, sealing the space, isolating her from the noise outside, leaving only the quiet hum of movement as the elevator began to rise. Emily's gaze lifted to the reflective surface in front of her, catching her own eyes again, steady, unshaken, but carrying something deeper now. Not just control, not just clarity, purpose, because now she knew exactly what she was doing. And more importantly, why? Her phone vibrated again. This time, she checked it immediately. A single line. He is moving. Emily's breath slowed, not from tension, but from alignment. Because that confirmed it. Everything was converging. The system, the external network, him, and her. The layers she had built were no longer theoretical. They were active, intersecting. And once that happened, there was no way to separate them again. The elevator slowed, then stopped, the doors opening to a quiet, controlled floor, far removed from the noise below. Emily stepped out, her heels soft against the polished surface, her pace steady, her presence calm, but the air here felt different. Tighter, more contained, as if the space itself was aware of what was coming. She moved forward, not hesitating, not searching, because she already knew where this was leading. Every step now carried weight. Not uncertainty, not doubt, but inevitability. Because there was no more room for adjustment. No more space for retreat. Every piece was in place. Every player was moving. And the system that had once controlled everything was now being forced into a position where it had to reveal itself completely. Emily slowed just slightly as she approached the end of the corridor, the space narrowing, the silence deepening, the tension building with every step she took. Her fingers relaxed at her side, her posture perfectly composed, her mind clear. This was it. Not the end, but the beginning of it. The moment where preparation ended and confrontation began. And as she came to a stop just before the final turn, the air around her tightening, the weight of everything pressing into that single point in time, one thing became unmistakably clear. There was no turning back. Not for her. Not for him. Not for the system. Because the countdown had already reached 0. Emily stepped forward and turned the final corner without hesitation, her movement smooth, controlled, but carrying the full weight of everything that had led her here. The room was exactly what she expected. Quiet, structured, minimal, not designed to intimidate, but to control. And at the center of it, they were already waiting. The manager stood to the side, no longer in charge, no longer the face of authority he had been before. The associate was absent. Jason was there, but positioned differently now, not dominant, not relaxed, his posture tighter, his confidence thinner. And him, standing at the center, not hidden, not observing from a distance, but present, fully, directly, as if this moment had been inevitable from the start. Emily stopped a few feet away, not too close, not too far, placing herself exactly where she needed to be. Balanced, visible, in control. No one spoke at first. The silence stretched, thick, deliberate, filled with everything that had not yet been said. But this time, she did not feel the need to break it. She let it build, let it shift, let them feel it. He was the first to move. Just slightly, a shift in posture, a recalibration that was almost invisible, but not to her. You escalated quickly, he said, his voice calm, but no longer untouched. There was weight in it now. Pressure. Emily tilted her head slightly, her expression neutral, her eyes steady. No, she replied softly. I just stopped playing slowly. A flicker. Small, but real. Jason shifted beside him, his jaw tightening, his gaze moving between them, as if trying to find where the balance had changed. He could feel it, even if he did not understand it. You think you are in control now? Jason asked, his tone sharper than before, less composed, more reactive. Emily did not look at him immediately. That was intentional. She let his words hang, unanswered, before finally turning her gaze toward him, not with anger, not with dismissal, but with something colder. Clearer. I know you are not, she said. The silence that followed hit harder than anything louder could have. Jason's expression shifted, just slightly, but enough. Enough to show that something had landed. Emily turned her attention back to the center, to him, because that was where the real exchange existed. You built a system to control outcomes, she continued, her voice steady, measured, each word placed carefully. But you forgot something. He did not interrupt. Not this time. Outcomes depend on variables, she said. And variables change. Another pause. This one heavier. Because now the conversation was no longer about what had happened. It was about what would happen next. He stepped closer, just one step, closing the space slightly, but not enough to dominate it. Not anymore. You forced exposure, he said, his tone lower now, more focused, but there was something else in it. Not uncertainty, but resistance. That has consequences. Emily nodded once, slowly, as if she agreed. So does silence, she replied. Their eyes locked again, the tension between them no longer hidden, no longer subtle. It was direct now, open, a battlefield without movement. You disrupted a system you do not fully understand, he said. And you believe that gives you leverage. Emily's lips pressed together briefly, not in doubt, but in thought, as if considering his words, weighing them. Then she spoke. No, she said calmly. I understand enough. A pause. Then, sharper. And I know what happens when systems lose control of their own structure. The air in. The room shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. The manager glanced down briefly. Jason shifted again, less stable now, less certain. Even the space itself felt tighter, more reactive. Emily felt it all. Measured it. Used it. You are still reacting to me, she said quietly, her gaze steady, her tone unwavering. That means I am not inside your system anymore. Another silence. Longer this time. And this time, no one rushed to fill it. Because they all felt it. The shift. The imbalance. The fact that this was no longer a controlled environment. It was contested. He exhaled slowly, his gaze never leaving hers, but something behind it had changed again. Not broken, not lost, but adjusted. You are assuming this is the only system, he said finally. Emily's eyes did not flicker, not even for a second. No, she replied. I am assuming this is the one you cannot hide anymore. The words landed clean, precise, final in their intent, even if the outcome was not yet decided. The silence that followed was no longer empty. It was full of movement beneath the surface. Calculations, adjustments, decisions forming that had not yet been spoken. Emily stood there, unmoving, her posture calm, her breathing steady, but her presence undeniable. She was not reacting anymore. She was holding the center of it. And for the first time, they were the ones who had to decide how to respond to her. Jason looked at him, not speaking, but waiting. The manager remained still, no longer part of the exchange, just a witness to it. And him, he did not move immediately. He did not speak. He just watched her, longer than before, as if trying to determine something he had not needed to question until now. The tension did not break. It did not resolve. It held, tight, unfinished. Because this was not the end of the confrontation. Not even close. This was only the moment where both sides finally understood the game had changed. Emily did not move, but something in the room already had. It was subtle at first, almost invisible, like a shift in pressure that no one could name, but everyone could feel. The balance that had held, fragile and contested, was no longer stable. It was waiting for something to break it. And she knew exactly what that something was. Her fingers lifted slowly, not rushed, not dramatic, just enough to draw attention, just enough to signal that what came next was intentional. Her phone rested in her hand again, but this time she did not hide it, did not keep it close. She held it where they could see it. That alone changed everything. Jason noticed first. His eyes narrowed, his posture tightening, a reflex he could not fully control anymore. "What are you doing?" he asked, but his voice lacked the edge it had before. It was not control. It was concern. Emily did not answer him. Not yet. She let the silence stretch, let the question sit unanswered, because that was where pressure built. That was where control shifted. Her gaze remained fixed on him, the one who had always been at the center, the one who had always defined the space without needing to speak. But now, she was the one holding it. "You said there are other systems," she said finally, her voice calm, almost quiet, but every word carried weight, precise, deliberate. "You were right." A pause. Then, sharper. "And they are already looking at you." The words landed before the meaning fully registered, and in that gap, everything changed. His expression did not break completely, not visibly, but it shifted, just enough. Enough for her to see it. Enough to confirm what she already knew. Emily's thumb moved once across the screen, not sending anything, not triggering anything new, just a small, controlled gesture. But it did not matter, because the action itself was the message. "The records you keep," she continued, her tone steady, her eyes never leaving his. "They do not stay hidden when someone else knows where to look." Jason took a step forward, faster this time, less controlled, his voice sharper. "You are bluffing." Emily turned her head slightly, finally acknowledging him again, but her expression did not change. Not anger, not frustration, just certainty. "No," she said. "You were." The silence that followed hit harder than anything else. Because now there was no space left for doubt. No space left for assumption. Only reaction. The manager shifted again, his composure slipping just enough to reveal something underneath. Not fear, but awareness. The kind that comes when someone realizes the structure they trusted is no longer secure. And him, he did not speak. Not immediately, but his stillness was no longer controlled. It was restrained, as if he was holding something back, calculating, adjusting, but for the first time, not ahead of her, with her. And that was the difference. Emily took one small step forward, closing the distance just enough to make the shift undeniable. She was no longer standing across from him. She was standing inside his space. And she did not yield. "You categorized me," she said quietly, her voice lower now, but sharper, every word landing with precision. "You reduced me to a reaction. Another step. Now I am the variable you cannot contain." The tension in the room tightened, not explosively, but completely, like a system locking under pressure it was not designed to handle. Jason did not move again. The manager did not speak. And him, his gaze held hers, but something behind it had changed again. Not control, not even resistance. Something closer to recognition. Emily felt it fully now. The shift. Not partial. Not uncertain. Complete. Because this was no longer a negotiation. It was no longer a test. It was a reversal. You do not control the outcome anymore, she said, her voice calm, final, leaving no space for interpretation. And this time he did not respond. Not with words. Not with movement. Just silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. And in that silence, everything settled into place. The system. The power. The balance. It had changed. Completely. But no one spoke. Because in that moment, no one was certain what came next. The silence did not hold this time. It fractured. Not with a single sound, but with a shift so subtle it rippled outward before anyone could stop it. Emily did not move, but she felt it, the exact moment when control stopped being centralized and started slipping through the cracks. It began with the smallest detail. The manager's hand. It trembled, just slightly, as if something unseen had reached him before he could prepare for it. His eyes dropped, not in submission, but in distraction, as if information had just arrived that he could not ignore. Jason noticed it next. His gaze snapped toward the manager, confusion flickering across his face before he masked it, but too late. The crack had already formed. What is it? Jason demanded, his voice sharper now, but the authority behind it thinner. The manager hesitated. That hesitation was everything. There is a discrepancy, he said, his voice lower, uncertain, kind of uncertainty that did not belong in this room. Emily did not look at him. She did not need to, because she already knew what that meant. The external node. The data she had released. It was no longer contained. It was circulating. And circulation meant exposure. Jason took another step forward, faster this time, less controlled, his frustration rising to the surface. Fix it, he said, but the words did not land with the same force they once did. Because for the first time, he was giving an order inside a system that was no longer fully responding to him. The manager did not answer immediately. That was the second crack. Then the third. Then the collapse began. Not loudly, not dramatically, but inevitably. A quiet cascade. Another device vibrated somewhere in the room. Then another. Subtle. Controlled. But enough. Enough to shift attention. Enough to break focus. Emily felt it spread, not just here, but beyond this space, through the invisible structure that connected everything. The names she had uncovered. The records. The classifications. They were no longer isolated points. They were linked. Cross-referenced. And now questioned. She exhaled slowly, her posture unchanged, but her awareness expanding outward, tracking the effect of her move not as a single action, but as a chain reaction. Because this was never about destroying the system directly. It was about forcing it to turn on itself. And now, it was happening. Jason turned back toward him, his expression tighter now, his control slipping further. Say something, he demanded, but this time, it was not a command. It was pressure. And pressure revealed weakness. He did not answer immediately, not because he could not, but because for the first time, he did not have a clean response. Emily saw it clearly. The hesitation. The recalculation. The moment where control became reactive instead of absolute. They are verifying internal logs, he said finally, his voice still controlled, but slower now, heavier, as if each word had to pass through something before it could be spoken. Cross-referencing classifications. Another pause. Then, quieter. They should not have access to that level. Emily tilted her head slightly, her expression calm, but her eyes sharper than ever. But they do, she said. Not a question. Not a challenge. A fact. The words settled into the space, and with them, the next shift. Because now it was no longer about what had happened. It was about what could no longer be undone. The system was no longer a closed loop. It had been opened. And once opened, it could not return to its original state. Jason stepped back this time, not forward, his posture tightening, his confidence thinning further with each passing second. This is not stable, he said, almost to himself, but loud enough to be heard. And that was the moment. The recognition, not of defeat, not yet, but of loss of control. Emily did not smile. She did not react. Because this was not about satisfaction. It was about completion. The manager spoke again, his voice quieter now, almost strained. If the classifications are exposed, the entire structure becomes unreliable. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to, because everyone in the room understood what that meant. The system depended on secrecy, on controlled perception, on the belief that it operated without interference. And that belief was gone. Emily took a single step back, not retreating, but repositioning, her presence no longer pressing forward, because it did not need to anymore. The system was already collapsing under its own weight, each piece reacting, each layer destabilizing, each person realizing, in their own way, that the structure they relied on was no longer intact. She watched it unfold, not as an observer, but as the cause, the center of a shift that could not be reversed. Because now, it was no longer about her. It was about them, and what they had built, and how easily it could break when someone refused to stay within it. The silence returned, but it was not the same silence as before. This one was filled with movement, with consequence, with the quiet realization that nothing would return to what it was. And as Emily stood there, steady, composed, completely in control of herself and the space around her, one thing became unmistakably clear. This was not the end. Not yet. But it was close. Because now, there was only one step left. Emily did not move as the system unraveled around her, not because she was frozen, but because she no longer needed to chase anything. Everything had already come to her. The noise of disruption, the subtle vibrations of devices, the shifting glances, the hesitation in voices that once carried certainty, it all existed now. As background. Not chaos. Not confusion. Just consequence. She stood at the center of it, her posture steady, her breathing even, her presence no longer something the system reacted to, but something it had to account for. That was the difference. That was the transformation. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, not searching, not questioning, but confirming. The manager no longer held structure. Jason no longer held confidence. And he no longer held control. Not fully, not completely. And that was enough. Emily felt it settle deep within her, not as victory, not as relief, but as clarity. The kind of clarity that removed hesitation entirely. Because now she understood something fundamental. Power was never about force. It was about position. And she had taken it. Completely. Her fingers rested lightly at her side. No tension, no urgency, just presence. She did not need to prove anything else. She did not need to escalate. The system was already collapsing under the weight of its own exposure. And yet, this was not finished. Not until she decided it was. That thought did not rush her. It anchored her. Because for the first time since this began, the outcome was no longer something she was moving toward. It was something waiting for her to define it. Her gaze returned to him, steady, unwavering, but no longer measuring. Not testing. Seeing. Fully. Clearly. And what she saw now was not the same man who had stood in the shadows, untouched, controlled, observing everything without consequence. This version was different. Not broken. Not defeated. But altered. Forced into a position where he had to respond instead of dictate. And that shift was irreversible. The silence stretched again, but this time it did not belong to tension. It belonged to decision. Because now, every path forward carried weight. Not just for her. For all of them. Emily took a slow breath, her chest rising, then falling, her thoughts no longer scattered, no longer calculating multiple outcomes. They had already converged into one simple truth. She could stop here. Walk away. Let the system remain fractured, exposed, unstable. That alone would be enough to ensure it never functioned the same way again. Or she could finish it. Not with force, not with destruction, but with something far more final. Exposure without recovery. A point of no return. Her thumb brushed lightly against the edge of her phone, still in her hand, the device quiet now, but heavy with everything it contained. The records, the classifications, the connections that had once been hidden. One action, that was all it would take. One decision, and everything would change permanently. Her eyes did not leave his, because he understood it too. He saw the same choice, the same line she stood on now. And for the first time, he did not speak. He did not attempt to redirect. He did not attempt to regain control, because there was none left to reclaim. Only consequence. Jason shifted again, his tension visible now, no longer masked, his voice breaking the silence, but weaker than before. You are not going to do this, he said, but it was not a command. It was not even a threat. It was hope. Fragile. Desperate. Emily did not look at him. She did not need to. Because this was no longer about him. It was not even about the system anymore. It was about her. And what she chose to become after everything she had seen. After everything she had endured. Her fingers curled slightly around the phone, not tightly, not hesitantly, just enough to feel it. To ground the moment. To make it real. Because this was real. Not the humiliation. Not the reaction. This. The control. The decision. The power to define what came next. Her breath slowed again. Her posture perfectly aligned. Her presence calm. Absolute. No fear. No doubt. No hesitation. She had started this as someone who was judged before she spoke. Reduced before she acted. Controlled before she understood. But she was not that person anymore. Not even close. Now, she was the one defining the outcome. The one deciding what the system would become after her. Her gaze held his for one final second, not as a challenge, not as a question, but as acknowledgement. Because he knew. He knew exactly what she was capable of now. And that knowledge was enough. Emily lifted her hand slightly, the smallest movement, but the most decisive one in the entire room. The weight of it settled into the silence, into every breath, into every unspoken thought that filled the space. Because now, there was no uncertainty left. No more waiting. No more reacting. Only choice. And as her thumb moved, just enough to trigger what came next, one. Truth became absolute. This time, she was the one who decided. Emily's thumb did not slam down, did not rush, did not act out of anger or impulse. It pressed with intention, with control, with a precision that reflected everything she had become since the moment she first stepped into that store. The action was small, quiet, almost invisible, but the effect was immediate. Not explosive, not chaotic, structured, measured. The data did not scatter. It moved exactly where she had directed it, to the exact points that would force visibility without creating noise that could be dismissed or contained. That was the difference. This was not destruction. This was exposure with purpose. Her hand lowered slowly, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady, as the room reacted not with panic, but with something far more telling. Silence, followed by disruption. Subtle at first. A shift in attention. A hesitation in movement. Then the system responded. Not outwardly. Internally. Devices vibrated again, but this time the pattern was different. Not isolated signals. Synchronized. Cross-referenced. Confirmed. The manager's composure broke first. Not dramatically, not loudly, but in a way that could not be hidden. His shoulders dropped slightly, his eyes scanning something unseen, processing information that no longer aligned with the structure he had trusted. Jason reacted next, faster, sharper, his voice cutting through the silence, but lacking the authority it once carried. "Shut it down," he said, but the words landed without weight, without response, because there was nothing left to shut down. The system was no longer contained within their control. It had moved beyond it. Emily watched it unfold without expression, without satisfaction, because this was not about watching them fall. It was about ensuring they could not rise in the same way again. That was her standard. That was her limit. Her gaze shifted to him, steady, calm, not seeking reaction, but acknowledging consequence. Because he understood it better than anyone else in that room. This was not chaos. This was irreversible structure. "You did not destroy it," he said quietly, his voice lower now, more grounded, but no longer untouched. Emily shook her head slightly, the smallest motion, but clear. "No," she replied. "I removed the illusion that it could not be challenged." The words settled into the space, and with them, the final layer of control shifted. Because now the system was not just exposed. It was vulnerable. And vulnerability changed everything. She took a small step back, not retreating, but creating space, allowing the consequences to expand outward, beyond this room, beyond these people, into the network itself. Because that was where the real impact existed. Not here, out there, in the connections that were now being questioned, in the classifications that no longer held authority, in the structure that could no longer operate without scrutiny. Jason's voice rose again, but this time it was different, less controlled, more fractured. "You think this makes you right?" he said, his frustration breaking through, but it did not land. It did not reach her. Emily turned her head slightly, finally looking at him fully, her expression calm, her eyes clear. No, she said. It makes it visible. And that was the truth. Not revenge. Not destruction. Visibility. Because once something was seen clearly, it could not return to what it was. The manager stepped back, not intentionally, not strategically, but because he no longer knew where to stand. That alone spoke louder than anything else. The system that had once defined his position no longer did. And him, he remained where he was, but the stillness was no longer absolute. It was adjusted, accepting, processing. You set a limit, he said quietly, his gaze steady, but no longer above her, no longer outside of the outcome. Emily nodded once. Yes. A pause. Then, final. And I stayed within it. Because that was what mattered. She had not burned everything down. She had not acted without control. She had chosen exactly how far this would go. Exactly what would be revealed. Exactly what would remain. And that choice was what defined her now. Not what had been done to her, but what she decided to do in return. The room settled into something new, something unfamiliar, something that no longer resembled the structure it once held. Not broken, but changed. Permanently. Emily turned slightly, her posture relaxed, her presence no longer pressing against the space, because it did not need to anymore. The shift was complete. The system would continue, but not the same way, not with the same certainty, not with the same control. And that was enough. But as she took her first step away, she felt it clearly. The weight of consequence. Not on her, but on everything connected to what she had just done. Because exposure did not end a system. It transformed it. And transformation always came with a cost. Emily did not rush her steps as she walked away from the room, not because she was unsure, but because there was nothing left to chase. The tension that had once filled every movement, every thought, had settled into something quieter, something deeper. Not absence, not emptiness, balance. The corridor felt different now, not because it had changed, but because she had. Each step echoed softly against the polished floor, steady, measured, no longer carrying the weight of reaction, but the clarity of completion. Behind her, the system still existed. It had not disappeared. It had not collapsed into nothing, but it had shifted, permanently. And that shift was enough. She did not look back, not out of avoidance, but because she no longer needed to confirm anything. What had been set in motion was already unfolding beyond that space, beyond those people, into a structure that could no longer return to its previous state. That was the consequence. That was the outcome. Her phone rested quietly in her hand now, no longer vibrating, no longer demanding attention. The silence from it was not absence. It was confirmation. The process had moved beyond her. It no longer required her input. That realization settled into her with a calm she had not felt before. Not relief, not satisfaction, something steadier, something earned. As she reached the elevator, the doors opened without delay, as if even the building itself had adjusted to her presence. She stepped inside, her reflection meeting her again in the polished surface. But this time, she did not search it for answers. She already knew what she would see. The same face, the same features, but not the same person. The hesitation that once lived behind her eyes was gone. The uncertainty, the quiet need to be accepted, to be understood, to belong within a system that had never intended to see her clearly. All of it had been replaced. Not with hardness, not with coldness, but with something far more defined. Awareness, control, choice. The elevator began to descend, smooth, uninterrupted, the quiet hum filling the space as the floors passed one by one. Emily stood still, her posture relaxed, her breathing even, allowing the moment to exist without rushing past it. Because this part mattered too. Not just the confrontation, not just the outcome, but the space after, the understanding of what it all meant. Jason's voice echoed faintly in her memory, not as a threat anymore, but as a reflection of what had been. The manager's hesitation, the system's fracture, his silence, all of it, part of something that no longer defined her. She had stepped outside of it, not by escaping, but by understanding it. And once she understood it, she changed her place within it. The elevator doors opened again, revealing the lobby below, brighter now, more open, the movement of people continuing as if nothing had changed. And in a way, it had not. The world outside still moved, still functioned, still carried on with its patterns and rhythms. But Emily knew something that most of them did not. Systems like that existed beneath the surface. Quiet, controlled, invisible, until they were not. She stepped forward, her heels soft against the floor, her pace steady as she moved through the space, no longer blending in, but not standing out either. She did not need to. Her presence was no longer defined by how others saw her. It was defined by how she moved, by the choices she made, by the boundaries she set. As she approached the glass doors, the light from outside spilled across the floor, warm, natural, unfiltered. She paused for just a moment, her hand resting lightly against the door, her reflection faint against the brightness beyond. Not to hesitate, not to reconsider, just to acknowledge. The beginning, the journey, the end, and what came after. Because this was not about returning to who she was before. That version of her did not exist anymore, and she did not need it to. She pushed the door open and stepped outside, the air cooler, the city alive, the world unchanged and yet entirely different through her eyes. The noise of the street, the movement of people, the ordinary rhythm of life continued around her, untouched by what had just happened. But she carried it with her, not as a burden, not as a weight, as understanding, as perspective, as something that had shaped her into someone who would never again be reduced to a reaction, to a category, to something defined by someone else's system. Her phone remained quiet, her steps remained steady, and her mind remained clear, because there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to fight, only something to carry forward. And as she walked into the flow of the city, blending into it not as someone who belonged within it blindly, but as someone who understood it fully, one thing settled quietly within her. The storm had passed, but its meaning remained. Emily did not stop walking, not because she was in a hurry, but because she had already arrived somewhere far more important than any destination the street could offer. The city moved around her in its usual rhythm, steady, unaware, unchanged on the surface, yet she carried within her the quiet imprint of something that had shifted far beyond what could be seen. Her steps were measured, grounded, each one reflecting a balance she had earned, not given, not borrowed, but built through every moment she refused to break, every moment she chose to see clearly instead of turning away. The memory of that first day lingered, not as pain anymore, but as contrast. The cheap clothes, the way they looked at her, the way they decided who she was before she spoke a single word. That version of her had stood there, absorbing it, questioning herself, searching for a place inside a system that had already rejected her. But now she understood something she did not then. It was never about fitting in. It was about recognizing the system for what it was and deciding whether it deserved her compliance. Her reflection passed briefly across a glass window as she moved along the sidewalk, and for a moment, she saw it again, not as something to question, but as something to acknowledge. The same face, the same woman, but no longer defined by how others measured her worth, no longer shaped by someone else's structure. She had become something else entirely, not hardened, not closed off, but precise, intentional. A person who understood that power did not begin with control over others, but with control over how she responded when others tried to define her. The system she had exposed would not disappear overnight. It would adapt. It would attempt to rebuild. Systems always did, but it would never be the same again. Not after being seen, not after being challenged, not after someone stepped into it and refused to remain what it expected. And that was her mark. Not destruction, not dominance. Change. A shift that would ripple outward, subtle but permanent, forcing every layer of that structure to account for something it had never accounted for before. Resistance, awareness, choice. She passed a group of people standing outside a store, their conversations light, ordinary, unaware of the deeper patterns that shaped the spaces they moved through every day. And she did not judge them. She did not feel above them, because she understood something now that went beyond anger or superiority. Not everyone needed to fight the system, but everyone deserved to know it existed. That knowledge was where everything began. Her phone remained silent in her hand, no longer a tool of action, but a reminder of what she had chosen to do and what she had chosen not to do, because that mattered just as much. She had not crossed every line available to her. She had not destroyed everything simply because she could. She had set a limit, a boundary, and that boundary defined her more than any outcome ever could. The wind shifted slightly as she reached the end of the block, a soft breeze moving past her, carrying with it the sound of the city, distant voices, the hum of life continuing forward. She paused for a brief moment at the corner, not to hesitate, but to take in the space around her, the ordinary world that now felt different, not because it had changed, but because she had learned how to see it. Her eyes lifted, steady, calm, her posture relaxed, her presence quiet but certain. There was no need for closure in the way stories often demanded. No need for final words exchanged in that room. No need for anyone else to acknowledge what had happened. Because the truth did not require validation. It only required recognition. And she had given herself that. She stepped forward again, crossing the street as the light changed, moving with the flow, yet entirely her own, no longer reacting, no longer adjusting to fit into something that did not deserve her. Every step now carried intention. Not heavy, not forced, just clear. Because she knew who she was now. Not someone who had been underestimated. Not someone who had been tested. But someone who had chosen to understand, to act, and to redefine the outcome on her own terms. And as the city carried on around her, unchanged yet subtly altered, by the ripple she had created, one final truth settled into place, quiet, undeniable, lasting far beyond this moment. She was never the one who needed to prove her worth. She was the one who decided what it was worth all along.